After my husband's mistress became pregnant with twin boys, my wealthy in-laws summoned me to a private club and slid a $12 million wire transfer across the table. They demanded I sign the divorce papers and vanish from Atlanta so their precious legacy could continue. I took their money signed without hesitation and booked a one-way flight. But what they did not know was that the medical results from their high society clinic would soon detonate their entire world right on the eve of their $1 million wedding. My name is Nia Sterling and I am 32 years old. I built my own commercial real estate empire from the ground up, fighting for every inch of respect in a world that constantly tried to push me down. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth and tried to replace you. The Piedmont Club in downtown Atlanta has always been a fortress for the old money black elite. It is the kind of place where legacy bloodlines and generational wealth dictate your worth before you even open your mouth. It is an establishment where memberships are passed down like heirlooms, and someone with my working-class background was only tolerated because I happened to marry into the right family. I walk through the heavy mahogany doors, my designer heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floors. I wore a tailored crimson pantsuit, my hair immaculately styled. If I was walking into an ambush, I was going to look like the executioner. A server escorted me through the quiet, dimly lit corridors to the private dining room in the back. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing the entire Davenport clan gathered around a long dining table like a high society tribunal. The air in the room was thick with tension and expensive perfume. My mother-in-law, Vivian Davenport, sat at the head of the table. She wore her signature pearls, a crisp blazer, and an expression of absolute, unvarnished disgust. To her right sat her daughter, Serena. Serena was adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet with a smug, self-satisfied smirk, looking at me as if I were something unpleasant she had scraped off the bottom of her shoe. And there, sitting across from them, was my husband of 5 years, Marcus Davenport. Marcus was a senior investment banker, the undisputed golden boy of his prominent family. He refused to meet my eyes. He stared intensely at the untouched glass of bourbon sitting in front of him on the linen tablecloth. But he was not alone. Sitting right beside him, her hand draped possessively over his arm, was Chloe Jenkins. Chloe was a former social media model who spent her weekends desperately trying to climb the social ladder at luxury nightclubs across the city. Today, she wore a tight, pale pink dress, specifically designed to showcase her bulging stomach. She was rubbing her belly with an exaggerated theatrical motion, making sure I saw it the moment I walked through the door. I did not flinch. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I pulled out my own chair and sat down directly across from Vivian. I placed my leather handbag on the table and folded my hands deliberately. The pristine silver cutlery and untouched crystal water glasses sat in stark contrast to the incredibly ugly conversation that was about to unfold. "I assume we are not here to discuss the country club brunch menu," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. Vivian sighed heavily, acting as if my very presence was draining the life out of her. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. She slid it across the polished wood table with a dismissive flick of her wrist. It stopped right in front of me. "We are here to handle a business transaction," Vivian said coldly. Her voice dripped with the kind of condescension reserved for people she considered the hired help. "Inside that folder you will find a wire transfer confirmation for $12 million. Below it are the finalized divorce papers. You will sign them today, and you will leave my son in peace." I opened the folder slowly. The wire transfer receipt from the Davenport Family Trust was sitting right on top. $12 million. Underneath it was a standard dissolution of marriage agreement already signed by Marcus. Serena leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, unable to contain her venom. "Let us be clear about exactly why this is happening, Nia. You have been married to my brother for 5 years, and you have entirely failed to produce an heir for this family. You are barren. You are a dead end." Meanwhile, Chloe here is carrying twin boys. Chloe offered a sickeningly sweet smile, shifting her weight so her baby bump caught the light from the crystal chandelier above us. We just found out the genders last week, Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Marcus needs a real family, Nia. He needs sons to carry on the powerful Davenport name. You just cannot give him that. It is nothing personal, but a man needs a legacy. I looked directly at Marcus. He finally raised his head, though his eyes were completely devoid of the man I once thought I loved. The realization washed over me that our entire marriage had been a sham, a transaction for him to leverage my business acumen while hiding behind his family name. I am sorry, Nia Marcus muttered, sounding more annoyed than genuinely apologetic. But my parents and my sister are right. The family legacy has to be protected at all costs. Chloe is giving me the children I need to secure our future. It is time for you to step aside and let us move forward. I leaned back in my chair and let out a short, sharp laugh. The sound echoed in the quiet private room, causing Vivian to bristle with visible indignation. You find this amusing, Vivian snapped, slamming her palm against the table. We are offering you a fortune to walk away from a marriage you have clearly failed at. You should be on your knees thanking us for this generosity. You came from absolutely nothing. You are a working-class girl from the South Side who manipulated her way into our prestigious family. We are giving you enough money to go back to whatever new money hustle you came from. Take the $12 million and leave Atlanta forever. I looked right at Vivian, my face turning to absolute stone. I let the silence stretch for a moment, making sure I had their undivided attention. Let us get a few things straight, Vivian, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. I did not manipulate my way into anything. I built a commercial real estate firm from scratch that brings in more annual revenue than your husband's entire historical portfolio. You call me new money like it is some kind of insult, but my money was earned through sweat, grit, and intellect. Your money is just sitting in a trust fund, collecting dust generated by people who are long dead. I turned my fierce gaze to Marcus. And as for your precious family legacy, Marcus Need, I remind you who actually saved it from complete destruction. 5 years ago, when the Securities and Exchange Commission was breathing down your neck for insider trading, your old money, family could not do a single thing. Your father's pristine country club friends turned their backs on you the second the federal agents showed up. Who was it that used her working-class South Side connections to find the one aggressive, brilliant defense attorney willing to take your impossible case? I saved you from a federal prison sentence, Marcus. I kept your pristine banking career alive while your mother wrung her hands and cried. Marcus swallowed hard, his face turning an ashen pale. He looked away, thoroughly humiliated. Chloe looked confused, blinking rapidly, clearly unaware of her perfect boyfriend's criminal close call. Serena stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. Do not you dare bring up the past to justify your current failures, she shouted. You are just bitter and jealous because my brother finally found a real woman. Chloe is giving us 2 healthy Davenport boys. You are nothing but a barren mistake that we are paying a premium to erase from our history. Sign the papers, take the $12 million, and disappear. We never want to see your face in our city again. I looked down at the divorce papers. Then I looked at the $12 million wire transfer confirmation. In their monumental arrogance, the Davenports thought they were buying my silence. They genuinely believed they were throwing out the trash. They had no idea they were simply funding my next empire. I picked up my smartphone from my handbag and opened my encrypted banking application. I navigated to my private offshore accounts. I watched the screen refresh. A pending incoming wire transfer for exactly $12 million appeared in bold green numbers. The money was already locked in the clearinghouse. It was real. They had actually transferred the funds. Without another word, I reached into my bag and pulled out my favorite customized gold pen. I flipped to the final signature page of the divorce decree. I did not hesitate. I did not pause to mourn a marriage that was clearly built on lies, convenience, and fragile egos. I signed my name with swift, sharp strokes, pressing hard enough to leave indents on the wood table beneath the paper. I closed the manila folder and slid it forcefully back across the table toward Marcus. "Consider it done," I said smoothly, capping my pen. Vivian let out a loud, dramatic breath of relief, settling back into her chair. Chloe beamed with a triumphant grin, leaning her head on Marcus's shoulder and rubbing her stomach again. They looked like a victorious royal family who had just successfully banished a troublesome peasant from their kingdom. I stood up and smoothed the front of my crimson suit. I looked down at Marcus, who still refused to make direct eye contact with me. "Thank you for the capital injection, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority and unwavering confidence. $12 million is a very generous parting gift. Enjoy your new life. Enjoy your twin boys. I am absolutely certain they will be everything your family truly deserves. I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I walked with my head held high, my posture impeccable. "Do not let the door hit you on the way out," Serena called after me, her voice dripping with petty triumph. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked out of the private dining room, leaving the Piedmont Club without looking back even once. My heart was not broken. My spirit was not crushed. I had $12 million, my absolute freedom, and my dignity fully intact. The Davenports thought they had won the war, but they did not realize the battle had just begun. I climbed into the back of my waiting town car and instructed my driver to head straight to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. There was absolutely no reason to return to the sprawling Buckhead estate Marcus and I had shared. My most trusted executive assistant had already packed my essential financial documents, my designer wardrobe, and the jewelry I bought with my own money. Everything else could burn for all I cared. As the car merged onto the highway, I pulled out my tablet and booked a one-way first-class ticket to London Heathrow. I chose London because it was the financial capital of Europe, a place where a woman with $12 million in fresh capital and a sharp real estate mind could build a formidable, untraceable empire. The Davenports thought they had crushed me, but they had merely armed me. They were blinded by their own generational arrogance, too busy protecting their elite country club image to realize they had just handed a self-made shark the exact resources she needed to become a leviathan. The cost of the Delta One suite was exorbitant, but I swiped my card without a second thought. I was no longer playing by Atlanta society rules. I was playing on a global scale now. Navigating the international terminal was a breeze. I moved through the expedited security checkpoint, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished terrazzo floors. I made my way directly to the Delta Sky Club lounge. The atmosphere inside was hushed and exclusive, filled with traveling executives and wealthy vacationers. I found a quiet leather wingback chair in a secluded corner overlooking the tarmac. A sharply dressed attendant approached immediately, offering me a glass of vintage champagne. I accepted the crystal flute fully, intending to toast to my newfound freedom, my massive divorce settlement, and the absolute destruction of my past. I watched the golden bubbles rise to the surface, reflecting the dim, ambient light of the lounge. I raised the glass to my lips, breathing in the crisp, expensive aroma. But before the liquid could even touch my tongue, a violent wave of nausea slammed into my stomach. It was not a subtle feeling. It was a massive, overwhelming revolt of my entire physical system. The rich scent of the champagne, which I normally loved, suddenly smelled like pure poison. The room spun wildly. The ambient chatter of the lounge faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I slammed the champagne flute down on the small glass table so hard that the liquid sloshed over the rim. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead and the back of my neck. I grabbed my designer handbag and practically sprinted toward the luxury restrooms at the back of the lounge. I barely made it inside a private marble stall before my stomach emptied itself completely. I dropped to my knees on the cold tile, gasping for air, clutching my stomach. The nausea was relentless, washing over me in brutal, punishing waves. I tried to stand up, gripping the edge of the marble sink for leverage, but my legs felt like lead. Black spots danced aggressively across my vision. The last thing I remember was the cold, hard impact of the floor against my shoulder and the muffled sound of another woman in the restroom screaming for help. I woke up to the harsh glare of fluorescent medical lights. The luxurious ambiance of the Sky Club was gone, replaced by the sterile white walls of the airport emergency medical clinic. A blood pressure cuff squeezed my upper arm tightly. An intravenous line was taped securely to the back of my left hand, delivering a steady drip of clear hydration fluid. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the heavy fog from my brain. A tall, older black man wearing a white physician coat and a stethoscope around his neck stepped into my line of sight. He had a kind but deeply serious expression. He reviewed a chart on his tablet before looking down at me. "Good evening, Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I am Dr. Evans, the chief on-call physician here at the terminal clinic. You gave the lounge staff quite a scare. You collapsed in the restroom due to severe dehydration and a sudden drop in your blood pressure." I groaned, reaching up to rub my pounding temples. "I have been under a massive amount of stress today," I explained, my voice raspy and weak. "I just went through a highly contentious divorce settlement. I probably just forgot to eat and pushed myself too hard. I have a flight to London to catch. How quickly can you discharge me?" Dr. Evans did not smile. He pulled up a stool and sat down right next to my bed, looking me dead in the eye. "Ms. Sterling, you are not just dehydrated from stress," he said with absolute medical certainty. "We ran a standard emergency blood panel when you were brought in unconscious. It is standard protocol for women of childbearing age who experience sudden syncope. The rapid blood test results are conclusive. You are pregnant. Based on your hormone levels, I would estimate you are exactly 6 weeks along." The world simply stopped spinning. The air left the room. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed seemed to deafen me. Pregnant. I stared at the doctor, my mind racing through dates, calendars, and timelines with terrifying precision. 6 weeks. 6 weeks ago was Marcus's 35th birthday. We had spent that weekend at a private resort in Savannah. It was the last time we had been intimate before the coldness set in, before I noticed his late nights and unexplained absences, before Chloe Jenkins paraded her twin-carrying belly into the Piedmont Club. The baby was his. There was absolutely no question. I was carrying Marcus Davenport's child. Dr. Evans offered me a sympathetic look, likely mistaking my absolute frozen shock for typical maternal surprise. "I can recommend several excellent obstetricians here in Atlanta for your follow-up care," he offered gently. "You are cleared to fly once this fluid bag is empty, but you need to rest and take this seriously." I nodded mechanically, not hearing a single word of his medical advice. My brain was already operating at warp speed, analyzing the catastrophic threat this diagnosis represented. If Vivian and Richard Davenport found out I was pregnant, my life as I knew it would be over. They had just paid me $12 million to walk away because they believed I was barren and useless to their grand societal legacy. They were banking their entire family reputation on Chloe's twin boys. But Chloe was a liability. Chloe was a former club dancer with no class, no pedigree, and no business acumen. They hated her, but they tolerated her for the sake of the heirs. But me, I was carrying a legitimate child conceived in wedlock. I was a highly successful self-made corporate powerhouse. If the Davenports knew I was carrying Marcus's true legal heir, they would instantly discard Chloe and turn their terrifying wealth and influence entirely on me. They would not allow a Davenport heir to be raised by an independent divorced woman outside of their direct control. They would drag me into the most brutal, grueling, and expensive custody battle in the history of Georgia family court. They would leverage their vast network of fraternity brothers, corrupt judges, and high society politicians to declare me an unfit mother. They would use my working-class background against me, arguing that my grueling hours building my commercial real estate firm proved I lacked maternal instinct. They would bleed me dry, lock me in endless litigation, and ultimately steal my child to raise him inside their gilded toxic cage. They would mold my baby into another arrogant, heartless Davenport clone. I placed my hand gently over my flat stomach. A fierce, primal protective instinct flared inside my chest, burning hotter than any business ambition I had ever felt. This was my baby, not a Davenport asset, not a tool for Vivian to parade around at her high society events, not a prop for Marcus to use to secure his inheritance from his father. This child belonged to me, and I would die before I let that arrogant, treacherous family touch a single hair on my baby's head. Dr. Evans unhooked my intravenous line and placed a small bandage over the needle prick. He handed me my discharge papers and wished me a safe flight. I thanked him, grabbed my designer bag, and walked out of the clinic. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless energy. I found a quiet seating area near my departure gate. I opened my handbag and took out my sleek smartphone. I looked at the contacts list. Marcus, Vivian, Serena. Years of phone calls, text messages, and family group chats. I navigated to my settings and initiated a complete factory reset. I watched the screen go black, erasing every digital tie I had to the city of Atlanta. The contacts, the photos, the shared calendar invites for gala dinners and charity balls I would never attend again, all wiped clean in seconds. But that was not enough. I popped the side tray of the phone, pulled out the tiny micro SIM card, and snapped it in half with my perfectly manicured fingernail. I walked over to a nearby trash receptacle and dropped the broken pieces into the garbage. The Davenports were dead to me. Marcus was dead to me. As far as the world was concerned, Nia Sterling had taken her $12 million and disappeared into the ether. I was no longer the discarded, barren ex-wife. I was a mother protecting her empire and her heir. The gate agent announced the final boarding call for the Delta One flight to London Heathrow. I picked up my boarding pass and walked toward the jet bridge. I stepped onto the plane, greeted by the flight attendant who ushered me to my private lie-flat suite. I settled into the plush leather seat and fastened my seatbelt. I looked out the window at the glowing lights of the Atlanta skyline, the city where I had built my first business, the city where I had fallen in love, the city where I had been viciously betrayed. I placed both hands over my stomach and made a silent vow. We are going to build a new kingdom, little one. A kingdom so vast and powerful that when we finally return to this city, the Davenport family will beg for our mercy. The jet engines roared to life, pushing me back into my seat as the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the dark, limitless sky. The $12 million was sitting safely in my offshore accounts. The divorce papers were signed and legally binding. The past was completely severed. I closed my eyes and let the steady hum of the aircraft carry me toward my new life, ready to embrace the isolation and the power that was waiting for me across the ocean. 4 months passed with the rapid, ruthless efficiency of a corporate takeover. I traded the humid, suffocating social circles of Atlanta for the crisp, anonymous power of London. My new base of operations was a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse in Mayfair overlooking the River Thames. The isolation I initially feared had become my greatest weapon. Away from the prying eyes of the Davenport family and their sycophantic country club friends, I was free to focus entirely on my two most important assets, my unborn child and my rapidly expanding financial empire. My pregnancy progressed beautifully. Away from the toxic stress of my marriage, my body flourished. During a private appointment at a discreet world-class clinic on Harley Street, my obstetrician handed me the ultrasound images. A perfectly healthy baby boy. I stared at the screen, tracing the tiny outline of his profile with my manicured finger. The Davenports thought they had purchased their legacy through Chloe and her twin boys, but the true heir to their bloodline, and more importantly, the sole heir to my self-made fortune, was growing safely inside me. I named him Julian in my heart, keeping the secret close. He would not be raised to rely on a family name. He would be raised to conquer. While I was building a future in Europe, my former in-laws were busy rewriting history in Georgia. I had completely wiped my digital footprint, but I still retained a network of highly paid, discreet private investigators and corporate spies who kept a close watch on the Atlanta social scene. The weekly reports they sent to my encrypted server were as predictable as they were pathetic. Chloe Jenkins and Serena Davenport Stiles had formed an unholy alliance united entirely by their shared hatred of me. Serena had always despised my working-class roots, and Chloe needed to legitimize her position as the new Davenport matriarch. Together, they launched a vicious, highly coordinated social media smear campaign. My investigators sent me screenshots of Chloe's lavish Instagram stories and TikTok videos. She paraded around high-end boutiques in Buckhead, showing off her growing belly wrapped in designer clothes funded by Marcus. The captions were thinly veiled venomous attacks. Chloe posted photos of herself sipping mocktails at the Piedmont Club with the caption, "Real women give their men legacies, not just headaches. So blessed to replace the barren, bitter mistakes of the past." Serena was quick to comment, hyping up the narrative. She posted photos of the Davenport family dinners, deliberately excluding any mention of me writing, "Finally a woman who understands family values and respects old money traditions." The gold digger took her payout and ran back to the gutter where she belongs. They painted me as a desperate, infertile ex-wife who had extorted $12 million from a prominent family because I was incapable of fulfilling my duties as a woman. In their elite circles, fertility and bloodlines were everything. By labeling me barren, they attempted to strip me of my dignity and justify Marcus's blatant infidelity. They wanted Atlanta high society to believe I was hiding in shame, counting my settlement money in some dark, miserable corner. The irony was staggering. The Davenports prided themselves on their refined, historically black, elite status, boasting about their generations of college graduates and generational wealth. Yet they had eagerly embraced a former nightclub dancer simply because her womb served their immediate needs. They paraded Chloe around like a prized broodmare, completely ignoring her crass behavior and endless demands for luxury goods. They were so blinded by their desperation for male heirs that they failed to see Chloe was bleeding Marcus dry. I read the reports over my morning espresso, feeling absolutely nothing but cold clinical amusement. Let them talk. Let them spin their ridiculous fairy tales for their country club audience. Their petty social media victories meant nothing in the grand scheme of the war I was preparing to wage. They were playing checkers on Instagram while I was playing three-dimensional chess in the global financial markets. But Marcus was not content with merely replacing me. His fragile, arrogant ego had been deeply bruised by the cold, emotionless way I had signed the divorce papers and walked away without shedding a single tear. He needed to prove his dominance. He needed to completely erase my legacy in Atlanta to feel like a man. My investigators uncovered his cowardly tactics within weeks. Marcus was using his substantial influence as a senior investment banker to quietly blacklist my old commercial real estate firm. The firm I had built with my own sweat, the company that had brought in millions in legitimate revenue, was suddenly facing insurmountable hurdles. Marcus leveraged his connections with major lenders and zoning board officials to block funding for my former partners. He made subtle, threatening phone calls to major developers, hinting that anyone who did business with my old firm would find themselves cut off from Davenport banking resources. He was trying to dismantle the empire I had left behind. He wanted to ensure that the name Nia Sterling became toxic in the Atlanta commercial real estate market. He wanted to scrub the city clean of my new money stain so his old money family could reign supreme without the uncomfortable reminder that a working-class woman from the South Side had outperformed them all. When my former business partner David managed to get a frantic message through to my secure line, his voice was thick with panic. "Nia, the banks are pulling our credit lines. Projects we had secured months ago are suddenly stalling. Marcus Davenport is systematically choking us out. He is telling everyone you embezzled company funds before you fled the country. He is trying to bury us." I instructed David to liquidate my remaining public shares in the firm and distribute the funds to our loyal employees as severance. I told him to quietly close the doors and walk away. Let Marcus think he had won. Let him believe he had successfully destroyed my professional reputation. Arrogance breeds complacency, and an arrogant Marcus was exactly what I needed for my ultimate plan to succeed. I did not need my old firm anymore. I was operating on a completely different level now. While Marcus was busy kicking dirt on my abandoned sandbox in Atlanta, I was laying the foundation for a financial juggernaut in London. The $12 million the Davenports had so generously wired me was a substantial amount of capital, but it was merely a fraction of my actual net worth. During our marriage, I had consistently funneled my massive real estate profits into anonymous high-yield offshore accounts, far beyond the reach of Marcus or his family's accountants. I combined the $12 million divorce settlement with my own hidden wealth to establish a shadow private equity firm. I named it Phoenix Holdings. It was a fitting title for an entity designed to rise from the ashes of my destroyed marriage and burn the Davenport family legacy to the ground. Phoenix Holdings was structured through a labyrinth of shell companies, proxy directors, and blind trusts in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. On paper, it was a faceless European conglomerate with bottomless pockets and a voracious appetite for aggressive corporate acquisitions. In reality, it was a weapon forged from my own strategic brilliance, guided entirely by my hand. I hired a team of elite, ruthless financial analysts and corporate lawyers based in the City of London. I paid them exorbitant salaries with one strict condition: absolute, unbreakable discretion. I directed their focus toward a single target: the investment bank where Marcus Davenport served as a senior director. Marcus's bank catered to the wealthy elite of the American South, but beneath the glossy veneer of their historic portfolios, they carried a significant amount of highly leveraged, distressed debt. Marcus, in his endless pursuit of maintaining his high society lifestyle and funding Chloe's increasingly ridiculous demands, had approved several risky, high-yield commercial loans that were quietly teetering on the edge of default. I instructed the team at Phoenix Holdings to begin quietly buying up this distressed debt. We moved like phantoms through the secondary financial markets, purchasing the loans through third-party brokers, so the paper trail would never lead back to me. We acquired the debt for pennies on the dollar slowly and systematically, accumulating a massive controlling interest in the liabilities of Marcus's bank. Every time Chloe posted a photo of a new diamond necklace on Instagram, I bought another $1 million of Marcus's bad debt. Every time Serena hosted a lavish luncheon bragging about the impending Davenport twins, I tightened the invisible noose around her brother's financial neck. Every time Marcus manipulated a developer into dropping my old firm in Atlanta, I secured another piece of his professional destruction. I sat in my Mayfair penthouse, sipping decaffeinated herbal tea, while looking over the latest acquisition reports from my lead analyst. The numbers were beautiful. She was burning through Marcus's personal accounts with reckless abandon. My surveillance reports detailed her daily shopping sprees in Buckhead. She demanded a fleet of luxury imported vehicles, refusing to be seen in the same SUV twice in 1 week. She hired personal stylists, celebrity makeup artists, and a team of interior decorators to completely overhaul the estate I had previously curated. Her ultimate obsession, however, was the wedding. She refused a private, elegant ceremony. She demanded a $3 million spectacle. She wanted exotic floral arrangements flown in daily from South America, a 10-tier cake adorned with edible gold, and a custom designer gown covered in thousands of hand-sewn crystals. Marcus was trapped in a financial nightmare of his own making. The crushing reality was that Marcus Davenport did not actually have $12 million in liquid cash to give me for the divorce settlement. The Davenports were asset-rich but cash-restricted. To get me out of the picture quickly, Marcus had committed an unforgivable sin. He had secretly bypassed the family accountants and borrowed the $12 million against the Davenport Core Family Trust Fund. It was the sacred financial reserve established by his grandfather, carefully guarded by his father Richard. If Richard discovered that Marcus had leveraged the family trust to pay off his ex-wife simply to appease a pregnant mistress, Richard would disown him immediately. Marcus was sweating bullets. He was secretly bleeding cash to fund Chloe's extravagant lifestyle, while frantically trying to cover the massive hole in the family trust. His only salvation was a massive upcoming banking merger. If he could force this highly leveraged corporate merger to close by the end of the quarter, his commission and bonus would be large enough to quietly replace the $12 million before the annual trust audit. He was operating on borrowed time and borrowed money. The real war, however, was taking place inside the walls of the Davenport estate. Vivian and Serena were experiencing a brutal reality check. They had despised my working-class background, but I had brought billion-dollar real estate deals and undeniable corporate prestige to their dinner table. Chloe brought nothing but reality television drama and an appalling lack of refinement. The breaking point occurred during a highly anticipated Sunday brunch at the estate. Vivian had invited several prominent women from her historic sorority and various alumni from prestigious historically Black colleges and universities. These were women of the Atlanta Black elite doctors, judges, and legacy heirs. Chloe walked into the formal dining room wearing a skin-tight neon pink maternity dress covered in massive designer logos. It was the exact definition of ghetto fabulous. She loudly interrupted a conversation about a philanthropic art gala to complain about the shipping delays on her imported diamond-encrusted baby strollers. Serena, sitting across the table, gripped her crystal mimosa glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. Vivian closed her eyes, utterly mortified, as the esteemed guests exchanged thinly veiled looks of pity and disgust. The true disaster struck when Chloe proudly announced her next social goal. She slammed her perfectly manicured hands on the table and declared that she expected Vivian to sponsor her application for the exclusive Jack and Jill of America chapter in Atlanta. The room fell into a deathly silence. Jack and Jill was an institution for the elite Black families of America, requiring impeccable pedigree, significant philanthropic contributions, and flawless social standing. Vivian carefully placed her linen napkin on the table. Her voice was dangerously quiet. Chloe, membership in that organization requires a certain level of established pedigree. It requires a degree from an institution like Spelman or Howard. It requires a lifetime of community service and refined social grace. You cannot simply buy your way into our legacy with a credit card. Chloe scoffed, completely missing the insult. I am carrying the Davenport twin boys. That is all the pedigree I need. Marcus promised me I would be at the top of the social ladder. You just need to make the phone calls and write the recommendation letters. Serena slammed her hand on the table, abandoning all pretense of country club manners. Are you completely delusional? Serena shouted. You are an embarrassment. You lack basic decorum. You have no education, no class, and no concept of how our society operates. You are treating my brother's bank account like your personal ATM, and you are making our family look like a complete joke in front of the entire city. My friends are laughing at us. Chloe stood up, her face turning red with fury. Do not talk to me like that. I am the mother of the future heirs. Marcus tells me everything. He tells me how you all look down on me. But you need me. You ran off that barren ex-wife so I could give you what she could not. You owe me this wedding and you owe me that membership. Marcus rushed into the dining room, his phone buzzing frantically in his hand, with yet another urgent alert from his banking team. He looked exhausted. His designer suit wrinkled the stress of his hidden financial ruin, aging him by the minute. What is going on here? Marcus demanded, trying to diffuse the explosive tension. Your mistress is making a fool of herself and demanding things she has no right to. Serena fired back. She wants Mother to sponsor her for Jack and Jill. She wants a $3 million wedding that we are entirely paying for. She is a parasite, Marcus. Do not call me a parasite, Chloe screamed, pointing a finger at Serena. Marcus, tell your sister to back off. I want my $3 million wedding, and I want it at the most expensive venue in this city. If I do not get what I want, maybe I will just take these boys and go back to Miami. Let us see how your precious legacy looks then. Marcus paled. He could not lose the twins. The twins were his only justification for the $12 million payout. If Chloe left, the entire facade would collapse, and his father would investigate the trust fund. Enough! Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Chloe will get the wedding she wants. Mother, just make the calls for the club membership. We are a family and we will present a united front. Vivian stood up, her posture rigid with absolute fury. She looked at her son with a mixture of rage and profound disappointment. I will not humiliate myself by sponsoring a woman who wears neon spandex to a formal brunch, Vivian stated coldly. You brought this vulgarity into our home, Marcus. You handle it, but do not expect me to parade her around my social circles. Vivian and Serena stormed out of the dining room, leaving Marcus standing alone with a screaming Chloe. The internal civil war had officially begun. The Davenports were tearing each other apart from the inside out. Marcus pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. He had another alert from his compliance department. His banking merger was hitting regulatory roadblocks. The massive commission he desperately needed to replace the stolen $12 million was in serious jeopardy. He looked at Chloe, who was now scrolling through bridal magazines on her phone, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse looming over their heads. Marcus excused himself and locked the door to his home office. He poured a massive glass of scotch and stared at the balance of the family core trust fund on his secure monitor. The deficit was glaring. If he did not close this merger within 30 days, Richard Davenport would order the quarterly audit. The theft would be discovered. He would be stripped of his position, disinherited, and potentially face criminal charges for defrauding his own family trust. He needed to project absolute wealth and stability to ensure the banking merger went through. He had to give Chloe the spectacular wedding she demanded to keep up the appearance of the untouchable Davenport success. The wedding was no longer just a celebration. It was a crucial business distraction. He had to book the most prestigious, undeniably elite venue in Atlanta to prove to his investors and his father that his financial power was absolute. He picked up the phone and called his executive assistant. Book the Magnolia Estate for the wedding, Marcus ordered, his voice laced with pure panic. I do not care what the deposit is. Wire the money immediately. Make sure the lifestyle magazines know we secured it. We need the press. We need everyone to see that the Davenports are stronger than ever. He hung up the phone and buried his face in his hands. He thought he had solved all his problems by paying me to disappear. He had no idea that his desperate, scrambling attempts to save himself were playing perfectly into the trap I had already set. While Marcus was desperately trying to buy time and save his fragile ego, my analysts in London were tightening the vice. The pressure was building, the cracks were showing, and the magnificent downfall of the Davenport family was accelerating faster than even I had anticipated. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. The following Tuesday morning in Atlanta was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Marcus Davenport's career. He sat at the head of a massive mahogany conference table on the 40th floor of his investment bank, projecting the aura of an untouchable financial titan. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his posture radiating the arrogance of a man who believed his bloodline made him invincible. Surrounding him were the senior partners of a massive regional banking conglomerate, men and women of immense wealth who were ready to sign off on a historic merger. This deal was Marcus's golden ticket. It carried a lucrative 9-figure bonus structure that would instantly replenish the $12 million he had stolen from his father's sacred trust fund. Marcus smiled, gesturing expansively to the legal documents meticulously arranged on the table. He was minutes away from salvation. He uncapped his gold fountain pen, ready to finalize the transaction that would secure his legacy and permanently hide his financial crimes. The heavy glass door of the boardroom suddenly swung open. Marcus's chief financial officer, a seasoned veteran named Harrison, rushed into the room. Harrison was pale, sweating profusely, and completely ignoring standard corporate decorum. He marched directly to Marcus, leaning down to whisper frantically in his ear. Marcus's confident smile vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. He dropped the gold pen. It clattered loudly against the polished wood. "The merger cannot proceed," Marcus announced to the room, his voice trembling despite his desperate attempt to maintain control. "We have a critical compliance issue that requires my immediate attention." The senior partners erupted in immediate outrage. They demanded explanations. They threatened to pull out of the deal entirely. Marcus ignored them, rushing out of the boardroom and dragging Harrison by the arm into his private office. He slammed the door shut and locked it. "What do you mean the merger is blocked?" Marcus shouted, loosening his silk tie as panic set in. "We have the capital. We have the board's approval." The ink was about to dry. Harrison pulled up a highly classified financial dashboard on the office monitor. "We lost control of our distressed debt portfolio overnight," Harrison explained, his voice shaking. "Someone initiated a hostile buyout of our major liabilities. Every single high-risk loan you approved over the past 3 years has been consolidated and purchased by a single private equity firm. They now hold the majority of our debt covenants." Marcus stared at the screen in absolute horror. "Who bought it?" he demanded. "Name the firm." Harrison pointed a trembling finger at the glowing red text on the monitor. "A foreign entity based in London. They call themselves Phoenix Holdings. They executed a hostile debt takeover at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Marcus, they just triggered a restrictive covenant clause. They are legally blocking any merger or acquisition until our outstanding debts are paid in full." Marcus collapsed into his leather desk chair, gasping for air. He ran his hands over his face, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. Phoenix Holdings was a ghost. He had never heard of them. He had no established relationships with their board, no country club connections to exploit, and no leverage to use against them. They had bypassed the Atlanta Old Boys network, entirely striking from the shadows of the European financial markets with ruthless surgical precision. In my luxurious Mayfair penthouse across the Atlantic Ocean, I was enjoying a spectacular English breakfast. My lead financial analyst sat across from me, presenting the real-time data on a sleek tablet. I took a delicate sip of freshly squeezed orange juice, watching the red indicators flash across the screen. Phoenix Holdings had successfully locked Marcus Davenport in a financial chokehold. "Execute Phase 2. I commanded smoothly, setting my glass down. "Freeze his corporate revolving credit lines. Initiate an immediate margin call on all his leveraged assets. I want him suffocating by noon." My analyst nodded, tapping the screen to deploy the financial kill sequence. Back in Atlanta, the walls were rapidly closing in on Marcus. The notifications hit his computer terminal like a barrage of missiles. His bank's primary credit facility was frozen. The emergency capital reserves he relied on to cover daily operational costs were suddenly inaccessible. Phoenix Holdings was demanding immediate repayment on the high-interest loans Marcus had recklessly approved to fund his extravagant lifestyle. If he did not produce $7 million in liquid cash within 48 hours, his bank would default. The federal regulators would step in. The merger would be permanently destroyed. Marcus was hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he frantically dialed his elite banking contacts, begging for short-term bridge loans. Every single contact denied him. I had already ensured that Phoenix Holdings sent subtle, untraceable warnings to the major financial institutions in Atlanta. The message was clear. Marcus Davenport was toxic. Any institution that extended him credit would face the wrath of a multi-billion-dollar international conglomerate. Just as Marcus was bordering on a total psychological breakdown, his office door burst open. Chloe Jenkins stormed in, completely ignoring the protests of his executive assistant. Chloe was wearing a full-length fur coat despite the mild Atlanta weather, her massive diamond engagement ring catching the overhead lights. She threw a thick stack of glossy wedding brochures onto Marcus's desk, scattering his urgent financial documents. "Marcus, we have a massive problem," Chloe whined, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "The celebrity event planner just called me. The floral designer in Paris requires an immediate $2 million deposit to secure the rare white orchids I want cascading from the ceiling of the Magnolia estate. And the booking agent for the Grammy-winning R&B singer I hired for the reception is threatening to cancel if we do not wire his performance fee today. Marcus stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and utter desperation. "Chloe, I cannot deal with this right now," he hissed through gritted teeth. "I am in the middle of a corporate crisis. The bank is facing a catastrophic liquidity shortage. You need to wait." Chloe crossed her arms over her pregnant belly, her face twisting into a furious scowl. "I will not wait, Marcus. Your sister Serena insulted me again this morning. Your mother refuses to introduce me to her Jack and Jill friends. The only thing keeping me sane in this hostile, stuck-up family is this wedding. You promised me the biggest, most expensive society wedding Atlanta has ever seen. You promised to show everyone that I am the new queen of the Davenport legacy." She leaned over the desk, invading his personal space. "If you do not wire that money right now, I am walking out that door. I will go straight to the local gossip blogs. I will tell them the great Marcus Davenport is actually broke. I will tell them you cannot even afford to marry the mother of your precious twin heirs. Your father will read all about your financial humiliation on the internet." The threat paralyzed Marcus. The mere mention of his father, Richard Davenport, sent a jolt of sheer terror through his veins. Richard was a proud, unforgiving patriarch who valued the Davenport public image above all else. If Chloe humiliated the family in the press, if she exposed Marcus's financial incompetence, Richard would not just disinherit him, he would destroy him. Marcus was trapped in a flawless, inescapable vice. On one side, Phoenix Holdings was systematically dismantling his corporate empire, threatening him with regulatory ruin and prison time if his bank defaulted. On the other side, Chloe was holding his family legacy and his public reputation hostage, demanding millions of dollars he simply did not possess. He looked at the woman standing in front of him. Chloe was not a partner. She was a parasite feeding on his desperation. He thought about me, his barren ex-wife, the woman who used to handle his corporate crises with brilliant cold efficiency. He had paid me $12 million to disappear, believing he was upgrading his life. Now he was drowning, and there was no one left to save him. Marcus opened a highly secure encrypted portal on his computer. He navigated past the bank's firewall and accessed the Davenport Family Core Trust. His hands shook so violently he could barely type his administrative password. This trust fund was the sacred vault of his ancestors, meant to remain untouched for generations. He had already stolen $12 million to pay my divorce settlement. Now, staring down the barrel of corporate default and Chloe's relentless extortion, he committed the ultimate financial treason. He created 3 fraudulent shell vendor accounts, disguising them as legitimate corporate operational expenses. Marcus typed in the transfer amounts. He siphoned $4 million from his family's generational wealth. $2 million went to appease Chloe's ridiculous Parisian floral demands and celebrity performers, ensuring she kept her mouth shut and maintained the illusion of their perfect high society romance. The other $2 million went directly to Phoenix Holdings to cover the immediate penalty fees and stave off the margin calls for a few more days. He hit the transfer button. The screen flashed green. The funds were gone. Marcus slumped over his desk, burying his face in his arms. He was officially a criminal. He was embezzling from his own parents to fund a chaotic mistress and pay off a phantom European corporation. He was hollow broken and running purely on fear. In London, my encrypted server chimed with a high-priority notification. I opened the file. It was a real-time tracking receipt from the Davenport Family Core Trust. I watched the $4 million fraudulent transfer process through the International Banking Clearinghouse. I smiled, leaning back against the plush cushions of my sofa. Marcus had taken the bait. He had panicked just as I knew he would. By stealing from his family's trust a second time, he had handed me the final nail for his coffin. The corporate chokehold was absolute. He was burning his own house down from the inside, desperate to keep the lights on for a wedding that would ultimately serve as his very public execution. The trap was perfectly set, and I was ready to move in for the kill. Vivian Davenport was a woman who believed that any social defect could be cured with an overwhelming display of generational wealth. If Atlanta high society was whispering about Marcus abandoning his highly successful wife for a former nightclub dancer, Vivian would simply blind them with prestige. She took complete control of the wedding planning, sidelining Chloe as much as possible, determined to transform this impending public relations disaster into a triumph of the Davenport legacy. Vivian needed a venue that screamed untouchable old money, a place so exclusive that merely securing a date there was a flex of absolute power. There was only one location in Atlanta that met her exacting standards: the Magnolia Estate, built in the early 20th century. The Magnolia Estate was a sprawling, pristine mansion surrounded by 60 acres of manicured botanical gardens, ancient weeping willows, and marble fountains. It was the crown jewel of the Atlanta Black elite, the venue where mayors, federal judges, and legacy families hosted their most guarded, high-security events. Getting married at the Magnolia Estate was not just a celebration, it was a coronation. Vivian marched into Marcus's office the morning after his panic attack and threw the venue contract onto his desk. The estate required a staggering $200,000 deposit to hold the date, and the money was completely non-refundable. Vivian demanded he wire the funds immediately, ignorant to the fact that her son was currently drowning in a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Marcus, pale and trembling, logged into his banking portal. He could not say no to his mother. He could not admit he was broke. With a heavy, reluctant keystroke, Marcus wired the $200,000 directly to the estate management company, draining the last remnants of his legitimate personal liquidity. The venue was locked. The date was set. The Davenports were legally and financially committed. But Chloe Jenkins had no concept of discretion. Vivian had strictly forbidden Chloe from speaking to the press, instructing her to maintain a dignified, aristocratic silence leading up to the wedding. Chloe, completely intoxicated by her new proximity to wealth and desperate for public validation, ignored her future mother-in-law completely. Chloe craved the spotlight. She wanted every woman in Atlanta who had ever looked down on her to choke on her success. 2 days after the deposit cleared, a notification pinged across the smartphones of every prominent socialite in Georgia. Chloe had granted a massive exclusive interview to Atlanta Pinnacle, the premier digital lifestyle magazine for the city's affluent Black community. The cover photo featured Chloe draped across a velvet chaise lounge wearing a skin-tight maternity gown that left nothing to the imagination, her hand resting heavily on her pregnant belly. The headline read, "A New Era for the Davenport Dynasty." Inside the article, Chloe bragged with reckless, vulgar abandon. She detailed the $3 million wedding budget, boasting about the custom Parisian floral arrangements, the celebrity performers, and the diamond-encrusted baby strollers she had ordered for her twin boys. But the most destructive part of the interview was her blatant name-dropping of the venue. Chloe proudly proclaimed that the Davenport family had exclusively secured the Magnolia Estate, ensuring that her wedding would be the undisputed social event of the decade. The article was an instant viral sensation. It circulated through every group chat, country club luncheon, and charity gala planning committee in the city. Serena called Marcus, screaming furious that Chloe had turned their sacred family event into a tacky reality television spectacle. Vivian locked herself in her bedroom, mortified that her prestigious social circle was currently reading about Chloe's diamond strollers. But the damage was permanently done. By publicly anchoring the wedding to the Magnolia Estate, Chloe had trapped the Davenport family. If Marcus or Vivian tried to cancel the wedding, downscale the venue, or change the location to save money, the entire city would know. The public humiliation would be catastrophic. The Davenports were forced to march forward with the $3 million circus, utterly paralyzed by their own obsessive need to maintain their social image. They were locked onto the tracks, and the train was accelerating. In my serene, sun-drenched Mayfair penthouse, my tablet chimed with the daily intelligence report from my Atlanta investigators. I opened the dossier and found the link to the Atlanta Pinnacle magazine article. I read through Chloe's gaudy, arrogant interview while running a hand over my growing 6-month baby bump. I shook my head, marveling at the sheer stupidity of the woman Marcus had chosen to replace me. Chloe had just publicly broadcasted the exact location, date, and budget of her wedding to the entire world. She had handed me the final critical piece of the puzzle on a silver platter. I walked over to my floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the historic streets of London. The Davenports thought they were securing their legacy at the Magnolia estate. They believed the historic venue would shield them from the gossip and elevate Chloe to a status she had not earned. They had no idea that I knew the intimate financial secrets of that exact property. During my years building my commercial real estate firm in Atlanta, I had made it my business to know the hidden vulnerabilities of the city's most prestigious properties. The Magnolia estate was owned by an aging aristocratic family who had severely mismanaged their generational wealth. They were drowning in back taxes and desperate for a silent, discreet buyout that would save them from public bankruptcy. The estate was a beautiful historic facade hiding a massive financial sinkhole. It was prime real estate waiting for a ruthless investor to swoop in and take absolute control. I walked over to my polished mahogany desk and picked up my secure encrypted phone. I dialed the direct line to the senior managing partner of the elite London law firm representing Phoenix Holdings. He answered on the first ring. "Good afternoon, Ms. Sterling," the lawyer said with crisp British professionalism. "How may we proceed today?" "I need you to initiate a blind all-cash acquisition of a commercial property in Atlanta, Georgia," I commanded smoothly. "The property is called the Magnolia Estate. I know the owners are quietly distressed and looking to liquidate immediately to avoid tax foreclosure. I want Phoenix Holdings to purchase the estate, the grounds, and all operational contracts attached to the venue. Offer them 20% above their current tax liability for an expedited 24-hour closing. I want ironclad non-disclosure agreements signed by every party involved. No one in Atlanta is to know the estate has changed hands until I give the order." "Consider it done," Madam, the lawyer replied without hesitation. "We will wire the earnest money from your offshore accounts within the hour and send the aggressive buyout contracts directly to their legal representation. We will have the deed secured by tomorrow afternoon." I hung up the phone and smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. The transaction moved with the terrifying, unstoppable speed of a corporate predator. When you offer an all-cash buyout to a desperate cash-strapped family facing public ruin, they do not ask questions. They take the money and they run. Within 24 hours, the aging owners of the Magnolia estate signed over the deed, the operational licenses, and all future venue contracts to Phoenix Holdings. The ink dried the offshore wire transfers, cleared the international banking hurdles, and the legal transfer of power was absolute. My London legal team sent the finalized digital deed to my secure server. I opened the file and stared at the glorious legal documentation. I was now the sole undisputed owner of Atlanta's most elite historic event venue. The sprawling botanical gardens, the marble fountains, the grand ballrooms, I owned every single inch of it. I walked over to the mirror in my penthouse, looking at the sharp, focused woman staring back at me. Marcus Davenport had stolen his family's sacred trust fund to pay the $200,000 non-refundable deposit. He was bankrupting his future to give his tacky mistress a $3 million spectacle. Vivian Davenport was betting her entire high society reputation on this one specific venue. Serena was clinging to the prestige of the estate to validate her brother's disastrous life choices. And now I was their landlord. Every dollar Marcus had begged, borrowed, and stolen to secure that venue had walked straight into my corporate bank accounts. Every lavish plan Chloe had bragged about in her magazine interview now required my explicit legal permission to execute. They were planning the wedding of the decade inside a building that I completely controlled. I owned the ground they were planning to walk on. I owned the roof over their heads. The Davenports had tried to banish me from their city, branding me a barren working-class failure. Now their entire social survival depended on a venue owned by the very woman they had paid $12 million to disappear. The irony was poetic, flawless, and utterly lethal. I picked up my phone and drafted a highly encrypted email to my private investigator stationed on the ground in Atlanta. I needed him to begin phase 2 of the operation. The financial trap was perfectly executed and the venue was fully secured. It was time to focus on the medical requirements that would serve as the final explosive payload. The Davenports were obsessed with bloodlines and genetics. They were going to demand medical proof of those twin boys before any trust funds were established. I needed to be ready to intercept those medical results the second they left the laboratory. I closed my laptop and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The game board was set. The pieces were all moving exactly as I had orchestrated. Marcus was trapped in a financial vice, bleeding out his family's wealth. Vivian and Serena were locked in a venue they did not know I owned. Chloe was dancing blindly toward her own destruction, blinded by her greed and her massive ego. I rested my hands on my beautiful growing belly. My son kicked gently against my palm, a strong, reassuring reminder of exactly why I was tearing the Davenport empire down to the studs. I was not just executing a corporate revenge plot. I was clearing the battlefield for my heir. I was building a fortress of power and wealth that no arrogant old money family would ever be able to touch. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute intoxicating rush of total control. The wedding of the decade was rapidly approaching, and the bride and groom had absolutely no idea that the owner of the venue was preparing to turn their lavish celebration into the most spectacular, humiliating eviction in the history of Atlanta high society. The beauty of the trap was in its absolute invisibility. To the outside world, the Magnolia estate simply underwent a quiet corporate restructuring. The staff remained the same, the pristine landscaping was maintained, and the grand crystal chandeliers were polished daily. But behind the scenes, my newly appointed corporate management team was meticulously reviewing every single clause, condition, and addendum in the Davenport wedding contract. We were actively searching for the exact legal tripwires I would use to legally annihilate their event when the time was right. Marcus was already a dead man walking. He was showing up to his bank every day, sweating through his custom suits, desperately trying to juggle the margin calls from Phoenix Holdings, while ignoring Chloe's endless barrage of text messages demanding more money for custom ice sculptures and imported caviar. He was a hollow shell of the arrogant investment banker who had sat in that private dining room and allowed his mother to hand me a divorce decree. He was drowning in his own lies, completely unaware that his former wife was the one holding the ocean. I smiled, the cool London rain tapping gently against my penthouse windows. The Davenports wanted a legacy. I was going to give them a legendary downfall. Richard Davenport rarely involved himself in the wedding planning, viewing the floral arrangements and seating charts as beneath his patriarchal dignity. But when it came to the Davenport Family Core Trust, his involvement was absolute. Richard was a man who demanded control over every cent that bore his family name. He summoned Marcus and Chloe to his private study at the Davenport estate on a Sunday afternoon. The room smelled of aged leather and expensive cigars, a testament to decades of old money power. Vivian and Serena were already seated on the velvet sofa. Standing beside Serena was her husband, Dr. Julian Stiles. Julian was a highly respected cardiovascular surgeon at Emory University Hospital, a man whose medical pedigree perfectly matched the Davenport social standing. Marcus walked in looking visibly exhausted. The financial strangulation I was applying from London was taking its toll. Chloe trailed behind him wearing a tight designer dress that emphasized her pregnancy, clutching a luxury handbag she had undoubtedly bought with Marcus's dwindling funds. Richard did not offer them a seat. He stood behind his massive oak desk holding a stack of legal documents. "We are establishing the generational trust funds for my grandsons," Richard announced, his voice echoing with unquestionable authority. "This family protects its wealth. The trust will guarantee their education, their housing, and their investments until they turn 35. However, My estate attorneys require complete medical and genetic profiling before the accounts are fully funded and legally binding. Chloe froze. Her manicured hand gripped the strap of her handbag so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Genetic profiling, she asked, her voice pitching an octave higher than normal. What does that mean? Richard looked at her over the rim of his reading glasses. It means we require a comprehensive panel, blood typing, hereditary disease screening, and full DNA mapping. The Davenports have a pristine medical history. We need to know exactly what genetic markers these boys are inheriting to properly structure their healthcare directives within the trust. The color completely drained from Chloe's face. She looked frantically at Marcus, her eyes wide with sudden, unmasked panic. Marcus, tell him this is ridiculous. I already go to my regular obstetrician. I take my prenatal vitamins. This is a complete violation of my privacy. Marcus, desperate to keep his father satisfied and avoid any deep scrutiny into the family finances, tried to place a calming hand on Chloe's shoulder. Chloe, it is just a formality. Marcus pleaded, his voice laced with underlying stress. Dad just wants to make sure the boys are protected. It is standard for trust funds of this size. It is not a formality, Chloe shouted, slapping Marcus's hand away. She turned her fury toward Richard and Vivian. You do not trust me. That is what this is really about. You sit in your fancy country clubs and look down your noses at me. You think because I do not have a degree from Spelman that I am trying to trap you. You want a paternity test because you think I am a liar. Vivian scoffed loudly from the sofa, crossing her arms. If the shoe fits, Chloe, you have done nothing but drain my son's bank accounts since the day Nia left. You demand $3 million weddings and exclusive memberships. Forgive us if we want concrete biological proof before we hand over the keys to the Davenport empire. Chloe burst into theatrical tears. She began pacing the room, sobbing loudly, claiming the stress was bad for the babies. I will not do it, Chloe screamed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Vivian. I will not let you treat me like some common criminal. I am the mother of your heirs. If you want to see these boys, you will treat me with respect. Marcus stepped between his father and his mistress, his panic skyrocketing. If Chloe walked out, his father would cancel the trust funding. If his father opened the financial books to reallocate the money, he would instantly discover the $12 million Marcus had stolen to pay my settlement plus the $4 million he had embezzled to pay off Phoenix Holdings and the wedding vendors. Marcus's entire survival depended on getting Chloe to comply. Dad, please, she is pregnant and emotional, Marcus begged. Give us some time. We can use the medical records from her current doctor. Absolutely not. A calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Dr. Julian Stiles stepped forward, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. Julian possessed a quiet, clinical arrogance that made him incredibly intimidating. He was a man of science entirely immune to Chloe's emotional manipulation. Chloe's current obstetrician is running standard basic panels, Julian explained, his tone completely professional but laced with underlying disdain. That is insufficient for our family's medical baseline. High-risk twin pregnancies, especially in our specific demographic, require rigorous screening. We need to check for specific genetic markers. We must screen for the sickle cell trait, thalassemia, and other hereditary conditions prevalent in the African American community. It is a matter of medical negligence to ignore these protocols. Chloe backed away from Julian, shaking her head. I feel fine. My family does not have any of those diseases. This is an insult. Julian did not back down. He stepped closer, his gaze pinning her to the spot. This is not an insult, Chloe. This is standard protocol for the elite circles you are so desperate to join. When multi-million-dollar trusts are established, medical clarity is a legal requisite. If you refuse the screening, you are legally obstructing the health and financial security of your own children. Furthermore, as a physician, your refusal to undergo a simple blood draw raises severe clinical red flags. Serena stood up, standing shoulder to shoulder with her husband. Listen to my husband, Chloe. Julian runs the premier private diagnostic clinic in Buckhead. You are going to his facility tomorrow morning. He will personally oversee the blood draw. If you do not show up, my father pulls the trust funds and we cancel the wedding. You can have your babies in a public hospital ward on Marcus's dime, assuming he has any dimes left. Marcus grabbed Chloe by the shoulders, his eyes wild with terror. You have to do it, Chloe, he hissed through clenched teeth. Stop fighting them. Just go to Julian's clinic tomorrow and give them the blood. Do not ruin this for us. Chloe looked around the room. She was completely surrounded. Richard held the purse strings. Vivian held the social power. Serena and Julian held the medical authority. And Marcus was too cowardly and financially compromised to protect her. She had overplayed her hand, believing her pregnancy made her invincible. Now the walls were closing in on her own secret. Fine, Chloe spat, her voice shaking with suppressed rage and undeniable fear. I will go to your stupid clinic. I will give you your blood. But when those results come back and prove these boys are Davenports, I want a public apology from every single one of you. Richard ignored her demand, turning back to his paperwork. Julian, make sure the lab expedites the results. I want the genetic profiles on my desk by the end of the week. I will handle it personally. Richard. Julian confirmed, his eyes never leaving Chloe's terrified face. The next morning, Chloe arrived at Dr. Julian Stiles's private diagnostic clinic in Buckhead. She wore oversized sunglasses and a sour expression, flanked by Marcus, who looked like a man walking to his own execution. The clinic was pristine, an exclusive medical facility catering to Atlanta's wealthiest residents. Julian did not leave anything to chance. He personally escorted Chloe into the private phlebotomy suite. He watched as the registered nurse prepared the sterile equipment. Chloe rolled up her sleeve, her hands visibly trembling. She refused to look at Marcus, staring blankly at the medical cabinets instead. The nurse applied the tourniquet, found the vein, and inserted the needle. Dark red blood flowed rapidly into a series of distinct color-coded vials, one for blood typing, one for comprehensive genetic screening, one for hereditary disease markers. The physical proof of Chloe's unborn children was captured in glass, sealed, and labeled with sterile precision. There, Chloe snapped, snatching her arm back the second the needle was removed. She pressed a cotton ball to the puncture mark. Are you satisfied now, Julian? The laboratory will determine my satisfaction, Julian replied coldly. He picked up the vials, ensuring the barcodes matched the requisition forms perfectly. These will be couriered to our secure testing facility immediately. We will have the full genomic sequence and blood profiles in 5 business days. Marcus exhaled a heavy breath, wiping sweat from his forehead. Thank you, Julian. I know this is necessary for Dad's trust documents. Just let me know when the results are in. Julian placed the vials into a secure temperature-controlled biohazard lockbox. The results will be sealed and delivered directly to the family. You have a wedding to plan, Marcus. Let me handle the science. Marcus nodded, guiding a highly agitated Chloe out of the clinic. They walked back to his luxury sedan, driving away under the false assumption that they had successfully navigated the crisis. They believed the test was merely a hurdle to secure the trust funds. They had no idea the blood in those vials contained the explosive code that would decimate their entire world. 3,000 miles away in my Mayfair penthouse, my secure phone buzzed. I set down my cup of herbal tea and unlocked the screen. The message was from my lead private investigator stationed in Atlanta. The subject has completed the blood draw at the Stiles Clinic. The genetic samples are currently in transit to the primary laboratory facility. I smiled, the cool London rain tapping rhythmically against my floor-to-ceiling windows. The final piece of the puzzle was officially in motion. The Davenports thought they were taking control of their legacy, but they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed. Blood does not lie. Genetics cannot be manipulated by country club status or old money arrogance. The truth was currently sitting in a sterile laboratory centrifuge in Georgia, waiting to be decoded. I walked over to my polished mahogany desk, pulled up my calendar, and looked at the date marked for Marcus and Chloe's lavish wedding at the Magnolia Estate. The timing was going to be absolutely flawless. I needed to ensure that Julian's sealed medical envelope did not just go to Richard's private study. I needed that envelope to arrive at the exact moment Marcus believed he had finally won. I needed it to land directly in his hands when he was surrounded by every single person he was trying to impress. I drafted a highly encrypted message to my private investigator authorizing a massive bonus payment. I gave him specific, rigid instructions. He was to infiltrate the courier service tasked with delivering the final lab results. He was to delay the delivery just long enough to ensure the sealed envelope arrived on the night of the rehearsal dinner. I closed my laptop, feeling a profound sense of calm settle over me. The corporate chokehold was bleeding Marcus dry. The venue was legally mine. And now the biological truth was officially on the clock. I rested my hand on my growing belly, feeling my son shift comfortably. Our return to Atlanta was going to be a masterpiece. Exactly 1 week before the highly anticipated Davenport wedding, I boarded a private charter at Farnborough Airport, leaving the cold drizzle of London behind. The flight back to Atlanta was not an escape. It was a hunting expedition. I was 6 months pregnant, my body transformed by the growing life inside me, but I had no intention of letting the Davenports or anyone in their pretentious social circle see my reality before I was ready. My wardrobe had been meticulously curated for this exact purpose. I wore a heavy, oversized tailored cashmere coat from an exclusive Parisian designer draped perfectly over a structured silk blouse and wide leg trousers. The architectural cut of the coat hung off my shoulders in a way that completely obscured my protruding belly, projecting high fashion rather than approaching motherhood. I looked like a ruthless European executive arriving for a corporate slaughter, which was entirely accurate. The private jet touched down at DeKalb Peachtree Airport, bypassing the commercial chaos of Hartsfield-Jackson. A sleek, black armored SUV waited on the tarmac. I slid into the back seat, giving the driver a single address. I was not returning to the sprawling suburban estates of Buckhead, where I had played the role of the dutiful, underestimated wife. I had leased a magnificent multi-level penthouse in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. The residence featured floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a panoramic godlike view of the city skyline. It was the perfect vantage point. From up here, the Davenport legacy looked incredibly small. I stepped into the penthouse, tossing my designer handbag onto a sprawling marble kitchen island. The space was already fully operational. My advance team had equipped the residence with secure encrypted servers, dedicated fiber optic lines, and a massive digital display wall that currently tracked the real-time financial bleeding of Marcus Davenport. I unbuttoned my heavy coat, letting it fall onto a plush velvet armchair, and placed my hands on my stomach. The baby kicked vigorously, reacting to the descent and the changing air pressure. "We are home, little one," I whispered to the empty room. "And we are going to burn their castle to the ground." Within an hour of my arrival, the private elevator chimed, signaling the arrival of my premier private investigator. Desmond was a former federal agent turned corporate intelligence specialist. He catered exclusively to billionaires, charging astronomical fees in exchange for absolute results and zero moral hesitation. He walked into the penthouse holding a heavily encrypted tablet and a sleek black briefcase. Desmond did not ask questions about my sudden return or my obvious pregnancy. He was paid to execute, not to converse. "Welcome back to Atlanta, Ms. Sterling," Desmond said, taking a seat at the marble island. "The board is set exactly to your specifications. I have the updated surveillance logs on the Davenport family and the structural parameters for the medical interception. Show me," I commanded, pouring myself a glass of iced lemon water. Desmond tapped his tablet, casting the images and data streams onto my digital display wall. "Marcus is currently living in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic," Desmond reported, his voice clinical. "We intercepted his banking communications. The hostile debt takeover by Phoenix Holdings has completely paralyzed his liquidity. He has quietly liquidated his luxury watch collection, sold his secondary sports cars through anonymous brokers, and maxed out 3 high-yield shadowy personal loans just to keep the lights on." I looked at the financial graphs plummeting in real time. He stole another $4 million from his father's trust fund to pay the vendors and cover his margin calls, I noted, tracing the red lines on the screen. He is literally financing his own execution. Desmond nodded. He is terrified. The banking merger he desperately needs to replace the stolen trust funds is completely stalled because Phoenix Holdings refuses to lift the restrictive covenants. Marcus is banking his entire existence on this wedding. He needs the public spectacle at the Magnolia estate to project absolute financial invincibility. He has invited the managing partners of the merging bank, 3 city council members, and several prominent federal judges. He believes that if he throws a $3 million party, no one will look closely at his balance sheets. He is using the wedding as a smokescreen to secure the merger. It was a classic old money survival tactic. When the vault is empty, polish the family crest and throw a gala. Marcus thought he could manipulate the Atlanta black elite into funding his salvation simply by feeding them imported caviar and pouring expensive champagne. "What about the medical results?" I asked, my tone sharpening. "This entire operation hinges on the biological bomb detonating at the precise moment he feels most secure." Desmond opened his black briefcase and pulled out a schematic map of the medical courier routes. Dr. Julian Stiles expedited the genetic screening for Chloe Jenkins. The laboratory finished processing the blood types and the hereditary markers this morning. The results are currently sitting in a secure holding vault at the testing facility. Julian requested the sealed documents be delivered directly to Richard Davenport's private study tomorrow afternoon. I crossed my arms, feeling a surge of adrenaline. We cannot let that happen. If Richard reads those results in the privacy of his home, he will quietly execute damage control. He will lock Chloe in a basement, force Marcus to annul the marriage, and sweep the entire scandal under an expensive rug. The Davenports specialize in burying their shame. I want this shame broadcasted on a giant high-definition screen. That is already handled. Desmond assured me, a rare, cunning smile crossing his face. My operatives have infiltrated the medical courier service contracted by the Stiles Clinic. The driver assigned to Richard's route has been generously compensated to experience a sudden, unavoidable vehicle breakdown tomorrow afternoon. The delivery will be delayed. By the time a replacement driver is dispatched, the Davenports will have already left their estate to attend the rehearsal dinner. And the new delivery location, I pressed. The courier has been instructed that the medical documents are of extreme time-sensitive importance, Desmond explained. Since the Davenport estate will be empty, the courier will be redirected to the venue itself. The sealed, red-stamped medical envelope will be walked directly into the grand banquet hall of the Magnolia estate tomorrow night, right in the middle of the rehearsal dinner toasts. It will be handed directly to Marcus in front of his parents, his colleagues, and the entire high society guest list. It was a masterpiece of logistical sabotage. I walked over to the glass wall, looking out at the glittering lights of Buckhead in the distance. The Davenports were currently rushing around their mansion, finalizing seating charts, arguing over floral arrangements, and making sure their designer tuxedos were perfectly pressed. Vivian was likely popping anxiety pills, furious that she had to share a room with Chloe's crass relatives. Serena was probably practicing her condescending smile in the mirror, and Marcus was praying to a god he ignored that his financial house of cards would hold together for just 48 more hours. They were all completely oblivious to the fact that the true owner of their venue, the master of their debt, and the mother of their only legitimate heir, was currently standing just a few miles away, holding the match that would ignite their funeral pyre. I turned back to Desmond. "The Magnolia Estate Management Team is prepped." Desmond nodded. "The estate manager has signed the non-disclosure agreements. He knows Phoenix Holdings is the new owner, and he knows you are the supreme director. He has been instructed to allow the rehearsal dinner to commence normally. He will not intervene until you give the explicit physical command to execute the breach of contract protocol. The security teams at the venue have also been replaced by our private contractors. When you decide to lock down the estate, no one gets in or out without your permission." "Excellent," I said, feeling the immense intoxicating weight of absolute power. I have spent 5 years shrinking myself to fit into their oppressive judgmental boxes. I listen to them mock my ambition. I watch them praise a man who was actively destroying our marriage simply because he carried their precious last name. Tomorrow night, I am going to show them exactly what a working-class girl from the South Side can do when you hand her $12 million and a reason to fight. Desmond packed up his briefcase and secured his encrypted tablet. You have the ultimate kill switch, Ms. Sterling. The financial ruin, the venue eviction, and the biological revelation are perfectly synced. I will have an armored vehicle waiting for you tomorrow evening. We move at your command. After Desmond left the penthouse, I stood alone in the sprawling, silent living room. The sheer magnitude of my wealth and influence hummed through the walls. I walked into the master suite and opened my garment bag. I pulled out the outfit I had meticulously selected for the rehearsal dinner ambush. It was a stunning, impeccably tailored black Saint Laurent trench coat, designed to be worn closed, utilizing sharp geometric lines to create a silhouette of absolute dominance, while hiding my 6-month pregnancy completely. Underneath, I would wear a sleek fitted black dress, paired with diamond stud earrings I had bought with my very first multi-million-dollar real estate commission. I was not going to dress like a scorned, heartbroken woman begging for closure. I was going to dress like the grim reaper arriving to collect a debt. I took a hot shower, letting the steam loosen the travel tension from my muscles. I ordered a private chef to prepare a nutrient-dense, high-protein dinner, ensuring my body was properly fueled for the impending warfare. I sat at my dining table eating quietly, reviewing the financial dashboards one last time. Marcus's bank accounts were hemorrhaging. His credit was non-existent. His entire reality was hanging by a microscopic fraying thread. I placed my hand on my stomach. The baby shifted, a strong rhythmic thumping against my palm. I smiled, a genuine warm smile that the Davenports had never earned the right to see. "Sleep well, my little king," I whispered into the quiet night. "Tomorrow we are going to reclaim our throne, and we are going to make sure your father remembers our name for the rest of his miserable bankrupt life." I walked to the bedroom, pulled back the Egyptian cotton sheets, and laid down. I did not feel a single ounce of anxiety or fear. I felt the deep, resonant calm of a predator who has successfully cornered its prey. The trap was locked. The escape routes were barricaded. The rehearsal dinner was tomorrow night, and I was going to serve them a feast of absolute, unmitigated destruction. The sun set over Atlanta the following evening, casting a golden hue over the sprawling historic grounds of the Magnolia Estate. Valets in crisp white uniforms rushed to open the doors of luxury imported vehicles, welcoming the absolute pinnacle of the city's black elite. Federal judges, legacy politicians, and old money matriarchs strolled up the grand marble staircase. Their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos caught the brilliant light of the massive crystal chandeliers hanging in the grand foyer. It was a scene of absolute sickening excess. Vivian Davenport stood near the entrance of the grand banquet hall, holding court with a glass of vintage champagne. She wore a stunning emerald green gown, desperately masking the anxiety that had undoubtedly consumed her over the past few weeks. Serena was right beside her, whispering vicious gossip to a group of Spelman alumni, acting as if the Davenport family reigned supreme over the entire city. Across the room, Marcus was furiously nursing a glass of scotch. He looked utterly exhausted. His forced, tight smiles completely failed to hide the absolute terror behind his eyes. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, pretending his bank accounts were not completely frozen, pretending his entire corporate existence was not currently hanging by a fraying thread controlled by Phoenix Holdings. And then there was Chloe Jenkins. She had strategically positioned herself near the extravagant, towering floral arrangements that cost Marcus $2 million in embezzled trust funds. She wore a sheer, highly inappropriate lace maternity dress, specifically designed to flaunt her swollen belly to the conservative crowd. She laughed too loudly, touching her stomach every few seconds, desperately trying to command the attention of guests, who were only politely tolerating her out of respect for the Davenport name. She was a glaring neon stain on their pristine old money aesthetic. I sat in the back of my armored SUV parked discreetly near the estate's private rear loading entrance. Desmond sat in the passenger seat, closely monitoring the venue's security feeds on his encrypted tablet. The guests are seated for the first course, Ms. Sterling. Desmond reported, his voice steady and strictly clinical. Marcus is approaching the microphone, preparing to give his welcome toast. Security Team Alpha is holding position at the main doors. You are cleared for entry. I checked my reflection in the tinted glass window. My black Saint Laurent trench coat was buttoned perfectly. The sharp architectural cut of the heavy fabric hid my 6-month pregnancy with flawless precision. My diamond stud earrings caught the dim light of the vehicle's interior. I took a deep centering breath, letting the cold, calculating energy wash over my body. It was time to introduce these arrogant people to their new landlord. I stepped out of the SUV and walked up the rear marble steps. The heavy oak doors of the grand banquet hall stood closed at the end of the long corridor. Two of Desmond's private security contractors, dressed seamlessly in standard venue uniforms, nodded respectfully and pushed the massive wooden doors open for me. I walked into the grand banquet hall just as Marcus clinked his silver spoon against his crystal glass to command the room's attention. The heavy rhythmic thud of my designer heels echoed loudly across the polished hardwood floor, shattering his moment. I did not stop at the back of the room. I walked straight down the center aisle, passing circular tables filled with Atlanta's most powerful, influential families. The ambient, polite chatter died instantly. Silver forks clattered against porcelain plates. A symphony of sharp gasps rippled through the elite crowd as people recognized my face. The discarded working-class Baron ex-wife had just boldly crashed the most exclusive, heavily guarded social event of the decade. Marcus froze at the front of the room. His mouth hung open, his crystal glass suspended helplessly in mid-air. The color completely and instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps a demon he knew he could never defeat. Vivian Davenport reacted with the speed of a striking viper. She slammed her champagne flute onto the nearest table, spilling the expensive liquid across the linen, and marched directly toward me. Her face twisted into a mask of absolute unhinged high society fury. "What in the world are you doing here?" Vivian screamed, abandoning all pretense of country club decorum in front of her esteemed guests. "How did you get past the front security gates? You are a pathetic, desperate woman. We paid you $12 million to crawl back to the gutter and disappear from our lives." Serena was right behind her mother, flanked by her husband, Dr. Julian Stiles. Serena pointed a perfectly manicured, trembling finger directly at my face, her voice echoing shrilly through the dead, silent banquet hall. "You must be completely out of your mind," Serena shouted, her eyes wide with rage. "You are stalking my brother. You are obsessed. You could not handle the fact that Marcus finally found a real woman to give him a legacy, so you show up here to beg for attention. You are a psychotic, barren mistake. Someone call the police right now. I want this trash thrown out onto the street immediately." I stopped walking, planting my feet dead center in the middle of the ballroom. I did not flinch at their insults. I did not raise my voice to match their hysterical screaming. I simply looked at them with a cold, terrifying amusement, letting them dig their own graves in front of the city's elite. Chloe, sensing an opportunity to perform for the captive, high-profile audience, waddled out from behind her multi-million-dollar floral arrangement. She placed both hands protectively over her pregnant belly, puffing out her chest, eager to deliver the killing blow she thought would permanently cement her new status. "Look at you, Nia." Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with fake pity and overwhelming unearned arrogance. "You really could not stay away, could you? You are obsessed with my life. You are obsessed with the fact that I am carrying the mighty Davenport heirs. Marcus is mine now. He upgraded. You are just a sad, empty shell of a woman trying to ruin my perfect night because you have absolutely nothing left in this world." I looked Chloe up and down meticulously, examining her tacky lace dress and the sheer pathetic desperation radiating from her pores. I assure you, Chloe, I said, my voice smooth, calm, and carrying effortlessly across the perfectly silent room. I have absolutely no interest in your life, your tacky, ill-fitting dress, or the man currently sweating through his custom tuxedo over there. I am simply here to conduct a bit of overdue real estate business. Marcus finally found his voice, though it was weak and broken. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands shaking violently at his sides. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice cracking with a pathetic mixture of terror and public humiliation. "You got your money. You signed the divorce papers. You have no legal right to be here. Please just leave before you make this any worse for yourself." Vivian refused to let her son plead with me. She turned frantically toward the main entrance of the banquet hall, waving her arms wildly in the air. "Security!" Vivian shrieked, her voice echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings. "Security, get in here immediately. I demand that you physically remove this woman from the premises. Drag her out by her hair if you have to. She is trespassing on a private closed event. I am giving you a direct order." Four large, muscular men in dark, tailored suits stepped into the banquet hall from the shadows. Vivian smiled triumphantly, assuming these were the standard venue guards responding to her frantic, authoritative command. She stepped aside, expecting them to rush forward and grab my arms. Serena crossed her arms, a smug, vicious smile spreading across her face. Chloe laughed out loud, rubbing her belly thoroughly, enjoying the spectacle of my impending physical removal. The four men walked down the center aisle with heavy, synchronized steps, but they did not approach me. They bypassed Vivian entirely, completely ignored Serena's smug expression, and walked straight past a highly confused, trembling Marcus. They stopped 10 feet away from me, turned around in perfect unison, and formed a protective, impenetrable barrier between me and the Davenport family, facing the shocked crowd. Vivian gasped, clutching her chest. "What are you doing?" she demanded, stomping her designer heel on the hardwood floor. "I said grab her. I am the mother of the groom. We rented this entire historic estate for the weekend. I am paying your salaries." From the back of the banquet hall, a tall, distinguished older man with silver hair and a tailored navy suit stepped forward. It was Mr. Harrison, the longtime estate manager of the Magnolia Estate, a man well known and deeply respected by every elite family in that room. He was a fixture of Atlanta high society events, the ultimate gatekeeper of old money prestige. He walked past the stunned, silent guests, bypassed the furious Davenport women without a single glance, and stopped directly in front of me. He did not look at Vivian. He did not acknowledge Marcus's existence. Mr. Harrison placed his hands respectfully by his sides and executed a deep, formal bow. "Good evening, Madam Owner, Mr." Harrison said, his voice projecting with absolute clarity across the entire grand ballroom. "The estate staff is fully at your disposal. How would you like us to proceed with these guests?" The room dropped into a dead, suffocating silence. It was the kind of absolute, profound quiet where you could hear a pin drop on a plush carpet. No one moved, no one breathed. The elite guests stared in wide-eyed, open-mouthed shock, their champagne glasses frozen in midair. Vivian Davenport staggered backward, her emerald gown catching on the edge of a Chiavari chair. She grabbed the edge of the nearest banquet table with both hands, just to keep from collapsing to the floor, her face turning an ashen, sickly gray. She stared at Mr. Harrison, uncomprehending, then slowly turned her horrified, panicked gaze toward me. "Madam Owner." Vivian whispered the words, barely escaping her throat, sounding like a dying gasp in the silent room. Serena let out a strangled, confused noise. "What is he talking about?" Serena demanded, looking frantically between Mr. Harrison and me, her arrogant facade cracking into pieces. "What does he mean, Madam Owner? She is a nobody from the South Side. We rented this venue. We paid the deposit." I slowly unbuttoned the top button of my Saint Laurent trench coat, making sure the entire room of Atlanta's most powerful families had a clear, unobstructed view of my absolute authority. I looked directly at Marcus, who looked as if he was about to suffer a massive cardiac event right there on the polished dance floor. I smiled a sharp, lethal, terrifying expression that completely and permanently shattered the untouchable Davenport illusion. Did you really think the historic owners of the Magnolia estate were immune to a cash buyout? I asked, my voice ringing out with terrifying melodic clarity. Did you really think you could throw a $3 million party in my city without my explicit permission? The sheer impossibility of my words hung over the grand banquet hall like a guillotine. Richard Davenport, the supposedly untouchable patriarch, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He shoved past a terrified waiter and stood beside his hyperventilating son. Richard's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at Mr. Harrison, the estate manager, expecting a denial, expecting the man to call me a liar and call security. But Mr. Harrison simply nodded, confirming my absolute ownership of the ground beneath their feet. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a sleek titanium iPad. The screen glowed brightly in the dim romantic lighting of the rehearsal dinner. I tapped the screen once, bringing up the official legal contract that Marcus had signed just weeks ago in his desperate bid to secure this venue. I walked slowly to the head of the main banquet table, forcing Serena and Vivian to step back. I placed the iPad flat on the linen tablecloth so the glowing digital document was visible to everyone in the immediate vicinity. According to Section 4, Paragraph B of the Magnolia Estate Venue Agreement, I began, my voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. Management reserves the right to immediately terminate any event contract without refund if the hosting party violates the established code of conduct. This includes, but is not limited to, verbal abuse of staff, public indecency, and actions that threaten the historic prestige of the venue. Chloe let out a loud, obnoxious scoff, stepping forward and placing her hands on her hips. You cannot just make up rules to kick us out. We did not do anything wrong. We are paying customers. You are just a bitter, jealous ex-wife trying to ruin my wedding. I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes fixed on Marcus, whose hands were visibly shaking. Your lovely bride-to-be just screamed at my venue manager and threatened to sue the estate to bankruptcy, I stated coldly. Your sister just attempted to order my private security team to drag me out by my hair. Furthermore, this establishment has a strict financial integrity policy. We do not host events funded by embezzled trust money and fraudulent bank transfers. Richard Davenport whipped his head around to stare at Marcus. What is she talking about, Marcus? Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. What embezzled trust money? Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. He was suffocating under the weight of his own lies. I tapped the iPad screen a second time, officially executing the cancellation protocol. I am officially revoking your venue contract effective immediately. And per the penalty clauses you so arrogantly skimmed over when you signed this document, the cancellation fees for a breach of conduct within 48 hours of the event are multiplied by a factor of 3. You do not just lose your $200,000 deposit, Marcus. You now owe the Magnolia estate an additional $600,000 in damages and lost revenue. Serena gasped, clutching her husband Julian's arm. You cannot do this. We have federal judges here. We have the mayor's chief of staff sitting at table 4. You are humiliating us in front of the entire city. I am not humiliating you, Serena. I am simply enforcing a contract, I replied smoothly. You have exactly 20 minutes to clear your guests off my property. After that, my security team will begin escorting people to the exits. Any vendors remaining on site will have their equipment impounded. Marcus suddenly snapped. The panic and terror that had paralyzed him finally boiled over into desperate, reckless rage. He lunged forward, slamming his fists onto the banquet table, rattling the expensive crystal glasses. You listen to me, Nia. Marcus roared, his voice cracking with panic and fury. You think buying this building makes you untouchable? You think you can play games with my family? I am a senior director at the most powerful investment bank in the South. I have the board of directors on speed dial. I have leverage over every commercial real estate developer in Atlanta. I will blacklist you. I will freeze your corporate accounts. I will make sure you never buy, sell, or lease another square foot of property in this state. I will destroy you. I stood my ground, completely unbothered by his pathetic display of false power. I looked at his red, sweating face and let out a soft, chilling laugh. You are going to blacklist me, Marcus? I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal, mocking whisper. You are going to freeze my accounts with what leverage, with what power? You do not even have the power to keep the lights on in your own office. I picked up the iPad and swiped to a new screen, bringing up a highly classified, heavily encrypted financial dashboard. I turned the screen toward him. I wanted him to see the numbers. I wanted him to see the exact mechanism of his destruction. Do you recognize these accounts, Marcus? I asked, watching his eyes dart across the digital display. Do you recognize the routing numbers for the hostile debt takeover that paralyzed your bank on Tuesday morning? Marcus stared at the screen. The color completely washed out of his face again. His jaw went slack. He stumbled backward, knocking over a Chiavari chair, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked almost medical. Phoenix Holdings. Marcus whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. The private equity firm in London. The margin calls. I smiled, tilting my head slightly. Allow me to introduce myself properly, I said, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. I am the Supreme Director and sole majority shareholder of Phoenix Holdings. I own your distressed debt portfolio. I hold the restrictive covenants blocking your precious corporate merger. I am the reason your bank's credit lines are frozen. I own you, Marcus. The entire banquet hall erupted into shocked whispers. Elite guests leaned forward, desperate to catch every word of the brutal corporate slaughter taking place at the head table. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. If you raise your voice to me again, I said, my tone absolute ice, I will not just kick you out of this venue. I will liquidate your entire firm on Monday morning. I will trigger the default clauses on every single loan you approved. I will hand your fraudulent financial records over to the federal regulators, and I will personally watch them escort you out of your banking headquarters in handcuffs. Do you understand me? Marcus could not speak. He was completely broken, hyperventilating, realizing that his ex-wife was not just a successful real estate agent. She was a financial apex predator, and he had willingly walked right into her jaws. Richard Davenport, piecing together the catastrophic reality of the situation, pushed past his son and grabbed Marcus by the collar of his custom tuxedo. What did you do? Richard roared, his aristocratic composure entirely shattered. You told me the bank was secure. You told me the merger was closing. You used the core trust fund to pay for this venue. Where is the rest of the money, Marcus? I decided to help him with the math. Why do not you ask him about the $12 million you gave me for the divorce settlement, Richard? I suggested brightly. Did you really think Marcus had that kind of liquid cash sitting in his personal checking account? He leveraged your sacred generational family trust fund to pay me off. He stole from you to get rid of me all so he could secure his precious twin heirs with Chloe. Vivian Davenport let out a loud, strangled gasp. Her hands flew to her face, her eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. I took your $12 million payout. I continued, my voice ringing with total victory, and I used it as seed capital to establish Phoenix Holdings in London. I used your own old money fortune to buy up your son's bad debt, cripple his bank, and purchase this venue out from under you. You funded your own destruction, Vivian. You paid me $12 million to conquer your son, and I did it in less than 6 months. Vivian swayed on her feet. The absolute humiliation of realizing she had financed the hostile takeover of her own family legacy was too much for her fragile country club ego to bear. She clutched her chest, gasping for air as the room spun around her. Julian Stiles, her son-in-law, rushed forward to catch her before her knees hit the hardwood floor. He guided her to a nearby chair, checking her pulse as she sobbed hysterically into her hands, utterly humiliated in front of every judge, politician, and socialite she had spent her entire life trying to impress. Serena was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Chloe was staring at Marcus, demanding answers, whining about the $3 million wedding that was rapidly disintegrating before her eyes. "You have 15 minutes left," I announced, checking my diamond watch. "The clock is ticking, Davenports. I suggest you tell your esteemed guests to head to the exits before my security contractors start getting physical." Richard Davenport glared at me with a hatred so pure it practically burned the air between us. But he was a businessman. He knew when he was checkmated. He looked at his son with absolute disgust, then turned to the crowd of elite guests who were watching the spectacle with wide eyes and recording the disaster on their smartphones. "The event is cancelled," Richard announced, his voice tight with rage and profound shame. "Please gather your belongings and exit the premises immediately. We apologize for the inconvenience." It was the most humiliating moment in the history of the Davenport dynasty. The untouchable, arrogant family was being publicly evicted from the grandest venue in Atlanta by the very woman they had discarded. I stood at the head of the banquet table watching the mass exodus. Wealthy guests grabbed their designer coats and rushed toward the valet stations, eager to escape the sinking ship and rush home to gossip about the epic downfall of Marcus Davenport. The string quartet packed up their instruments in a panic. The catering staff froze, unsure of what to do with the lavish, untouched feast spread across the tables. Marcus stood frozen in the center of the room, looking at the ruins of his life. He had lost his firm, his family trust, his reputation, and his venue. He had nothing left to leverage. He was completely at my mercy. But the night was not over. The financial ruin and the public eviction were only the opening acts. The true devastation, the biological bomb that would permanently erase his legacy, was still waiting in the wings. I glanced toward the main entrance, watching the heavy oak doors waiting for my hired operative to deliver the final lethal blow. The grand oak doors of the banquet hall remained my focal point as the disgraced guests continued their rapid whispering exodus. Marcus stood amidst his shattered social standing, chest heaving. The hatred that had burned in his eyes just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, pathetic desperation. "Nia, please." Marcus begged, his voice cracking loudly. He took a stumbling step, hands raised in surrender. "I will sign whatever you want. I will transfer the remaining assets. Just please let us keep the venue for the weekend. Let the wedding happen. You proved your point. You destroyed me. But if you kick us out tonight, my father will disinherit me completely. The social humiliation will kill my mother. Just let us save face in front of our friends. I am begging you." I stared down at the pathetic man I had once vowed to spend my life with, now reduced to a trembling mess, begging for scraps of dignity from the woman he wronged. "You do not get to dictate the terms of your surrender, Marcus," I replied with icy finality. "You built this house of cards on a foundation of lies. Saving face is a luxury reserved for those who possess honor. You have none. You will leave this estate tonight, and you will do it in front of every single person you tried to impress." Richard Davenport stepped forward, grabbing Marcus by the arm and jerking him backward. "Stop groveling to her." Richard spat, his voice laced with toxic pride. "We will secure another venue. We will fix the financial accounts. We will survive this petty attack." I smiled at Richard, admiring his sheer delusion. "You cannot fix a financial hole that deep," I stated calmly. "Your son embezzled $4 million from your sacred core trust fund just to pay the cancellation fees you now owe me. He leveraged your legacy to fund a circus. You are already bankrupt. You just have not accepted the math yet." Vivian moaned from her chair, while Serena stood frozen, darting her eyes between me and her ruined brother. They were a dynasty in freefall. And Chloe. While the Davenports mourned their bank accounts and their social standing, Chloe kept glancing nervously toward the main entrance. Her manicured hands rubbed her pregnant belly in rapid circles. She was sweating. The suffocating weight of her impending doom was settling over her shoulders. She knew her time was running out. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the banquet hall swung wide open. The sound was loud and authoritative. A man stepped into the room wearing a crisp dark blue uniform adorned with the logo of the premier medical courier service in Atlanta. A heavy-duty lockbox hung from his shoulder. In his right hand, he carried a thick white envelope. Across the front, stamped in vibrant red ink, were the words, "Urgent medical results." The heavy atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The chaotic sounds of the eviction vanished, replaced by dense anticipation. Even the fleeing guests who were lingering near the coat check paused, craning their necks to witness this strange, highly irregular interruption. The courier walked with purposeful strides directly down the center aisle, bypassing the overturned chairs. He did not look at me. His eyes were locked firmly on his target. "Marcus Davenport," the courier asked, his voice cutting through the thick silence like a scalpel. Marcus blinked rapidly, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. "Yes," he answered, his voice shaky. "I am Marcus Davenport." The courier stepped forward and extended the oversized white envelope directly toward him. "I have a priority overnight delivery from the Styles Diagnostic Clinic. I was instructed that these documents required immediate direct delivery to your hands only. Please sign here." Marcus stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He mechanically took the electronic clipboard from the courier and scribbled his signature. The courier handed him the red-stamped envelope, turned on his heel, and marched right back out of the grand banquet hall. The moment the heavy oak doors closed behind the courier, absolute pandemonium erupted. Chloe let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek. The fake, confident persona she had weaponized all evening completely disintegrated. Her face turned an unnatural, ghastly shade of white. She lunged forward with shocking speed for a heavily pregnant woman, her hands clawing desperately at the air as she tried to snatch the envelope straight out of Marcus's hands. "Give me that!" Chloe screamed, her voice bordering on hysterical. "Give it to me right now, Marcus. You have no right to open that. Those are my medical records. That is a direct violation of my privacy. You cannot look at that without my permission." Marcus stepped back, startled by her sudden violent outburst. He held the envelope out of her reach, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Chloe, what is wrong with you?" Marcus asked, his voice wavering. "My father demanded these results for the trust fund. It is just the genetic screening and the blood panels." "Why are you acting like this? Because it is illegal!" Chloe shrieked, tears of sheer, unadulterated panic streaming down her heavily contoured face. She jumped toward him again, her fingernails scraping against his custom tuxedo jacket. "Julian had no right to send those here. He is violating medical laws. Give me the envelope, Marcus. We can look at it tomorrow. We can look at it at home. Please, Marcus, I am begging you. Give it to me." Before she could make another desperate grab for the documents, Dr. Julian Stiles stepped forcefully into the center of the altercation. The esteemed cardiovascular surgeon moved with the rigid, commanding authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience in his operating room. He grabbed Chloe by the wrist, his grip ironclad and punishing, physically restraining her from reaching Marcus. "Stand down, Chloe," Julian ordered, his voice echoing with cold medical fury. "Stop making a scene. You signed a comprehensive medical release waiver at my clinic yesterday morning. You explicitly authorized the disclosure of these specific genetic and blood profiling results to the Davenport family for the explicit purpose of establishing generational trust funds. There is no privacy violation here. This is standard, legally mandated disclosure." Julian turned his piercing gaze toward his brother-in-law. Marcus was standing frozen, holding the envelope like a ticking time bomb. The realization was slowly, agonizingly dawning on Marcus that his mistress was not reacting with the indignation of a violated patient. She was reacting with the absolute blinding terror of a guilty criminal whose darkest secret had just been carried into the room. "Open the envelope," Marcus Julian commanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or hesitation. "Open it right now. If she is fighting this hard to keep you from reading a standard genetic panel, Then there is something in those pages that she is desperately trying to hide from this family. No, Chloe wailed, dropping to her knees on the polished hardwood floor. She sobbed wildly, burying her face in her hands, her entire body shaking with violent tremors. Please, Marcus, do not open it. I love you. I swear I love you. Please just put it away. Let us go home. Please take me home. Serena stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with vicious, predatory suspicion. Open the damn envelope, Marcus Serena hissed. Open it before I rip it out of your hands and read it to the entire room myself. I stood perfectly still at the head of the banquet table, my hands resting lightly in the pockets of my Saint Laurent trench coat. My posture was relaxed, my expression arranged into a mask of cold, calculated amusement. I watched the spectacular tragic implosion of the Davenport legacy unfolding exactly as I had orchestrated. I watched the mighty, arrogant family tear themselves apart from the inside out. Marcus looked down at Chloe, who was weeping uncontrollably on the floor at his feet. He looked at his father, whose face was purple with rage. He looked at Julian, who stood like a silent sentinel of medical truth. Finally, Marcus looked at the red-stamped envelope in his hands. His fingers trembled as he slid his thumb under the heavy paper flap. He tore the envelope open with a loud ripping sound that seemed to echo off the crystal chandeliers above. He pulled out a thick stack of medical documents topped with a summary page bearing the official undeniable crest of the Styles Diagnostic Clinic. The banquet hall was dead silent, save for the pathetic, gasping sobs of Chloe Jenkins on the floor. Every eye was locked onto Marcus. Marcus unfolded the heavy medical paper. His eyes moved to the top of the page. I watched him read. I watched his gaze scan the first line of the diagnostic summary. I watched the exact, precise second his entire world shattered into unrecoverable pieces. I watched him read. I watched his gaze scan the first line of the diagnostic summary. I watched the exact, precise second his entire world shattered into unrecoverable pieces. Marcus stared at the thick, embossed paper. His hands began to shake with a violent, uncontrollable tremor. The expensive paper rattled loudly in the dead quiet of the grand ballroom. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if trying to physically dislodge the words he was reading. He looked down at Chloe, who was weeping on the floor, and then back to the medical document. Read it, Richard demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Read the document, Marcus. What does it say? Marcus swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a hollow, broken rasp. It is the blood typing and genetic panel. Then read the results, Julian instructed, stepping closer to ensure Marcus did not try to hide the findings. This is a medical and legal necessity for the trust fund. Read the blood types. Marcus cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the clinical text. My blood type is AB positive. He stated, his voice trembling. Chloe is O negative. And the twins Julian pressed his medical authority, leaving no room for evasion. Marcus stared at the paper, his face turning an impossible shade of gray. The twins are O positive. A collective gasp rippled through the remaining guests and the Davenport family members. Julian crossed his arms over his chest, his expression hardening into absolute clinical certainty. That is biologically impossible, Julian announced, his voice projecting across the room with devastating clarity. Genetics do not lie, Marcus. A father with type A, B blood and a mother with type O blood can only produce offspring with type A or type B blood. It is a fundamental law of biology. They cannot produce a child with type O blood. Those children do not share your DNA. No, Chloe wailed, scrambling to her knees and reaching for the hem of Marcus's tuxedo jacket. It is a mistake. The lab made a mistake. You know how these places are. They mixed up the vials. Julian hates me. He told them to fake the results. Julian did not even flinch at her accusation. He simply pointed a rigid finger at the document still clutched in Marcus's trembling hands. Keep reading, Marcus. The blood type is just the primary indicator. Look at the genetic screening results. Look at the hereditary markers. Marcus tore his eyes away from Chloe's desperate tear-streaked face. He forced his gaze back to the medical report. He flipped to the second page, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. The genetic screening, Marcus read, his voice dropping to a devastated whisper. It says the twins carry the sickle cell trait. Richard stepped forward, his aristocratic face contorting in confusion. The sickle cell trait? No one in the Davenport lineage carries that genetic marker. We have been tested for generations. Our medical history is pristine. I know, Marcus replied, a single tear escaping his eye and rolling down his cheek. The report explicitly confirms that my genetic sample tested negative for the trait. And Chloe Julian demanded, playing his role as the medical executioner flawlessly. What does her genetic panel say? Marcus looked down at the woman groveling at his feet. His voice was completely devoid of life. It says she is also negative. Neither of us carries the trait. Julian turned to face the entire Davenport family, delivering the final fatal diagnosis. Sickle cell trait is a genetic condition. It must be inherited from at least one biological parent. If neither Marcus nor Chloe possesses the genetic marker but the unborn twins carry it, there is only one scientific conclusion. Chloe conceived these children with another man, a man who carries the sickle cell trait. Marcus, you are not the father. You are not even a biological possibility. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, and apocalyptic. The grand illusion of the Davenport legacy had just been incinerated by hard, undeniable science. Chloe collapsed entirely onto the hardwood floor, sobbing hysterically, her hands covering her face. She curled into a fetal position, her neon maternity dress bunching up around her thighs, looking exactly like the fraudulent, desperate imposter she had always been. Who is it? Marcus roared, the sudden explosion of rage tearing from his throat like a wounded animal. He dropped the medical papers and grabbed Chloe by the shoulders, hauling her roughly to her feet. He shook her, his eyes wild with a terrifying, unhinged fury. Who is the father, Chloe? Tell me right now before I throw you out into the street. Chloe sobbed, her head snapping back and forth. I am sorry. I am so sorry, Marcus. I did not know. I swear I thought they were yours. Who is it? Serena screamed, stepping forward and slapping Chloe's hands away from Marcus's jacket. Tell us who you slept with while you were living in my brother's house, spending our family's money. Chloe choked on her tears, shrinking away from the furious Davenport women. It was Darnell, she whimpered, the confession spilling out in a pathetic, defeated rush. Marcus froze. Darnell. Your personal trainer. The guy I pay to come to the estate 3 times a week? Chloe nodded frantically, tears ruining her expensive, professionally applied makeup. It just happened a few times. You were always working late. You were always stressed about your wife. I was lonely. Darnell paid attention to me. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I knew you wanted kids so badly. I knew your family wanted an heir. I thought if I gave you boys, you would leave Nia and give me the life you promised. I never meant to hurt you, Marcus. I just wanted the lifestyle. Serena let out a visceral, horrifying scream of absolute repulsion. She backed away from Chloe as if the woman were carrying a lethal plague. You slept with the hired help in my brother's bed. Serena shrieked, her high society composure completely obliterated. You let us pay for a $3 million wedding. You let my mother buy you diamond jewelry to celebrate a pregnancy created by a glorified gym attendant. You are disgusting. You are absolute, unadulterated trash. Vivian Davenport could no longer handle the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the humiliation. The realization that she had paraded this woman around Atlanta, that she had alienated her wealthy friends, and that she had paid me $12 million to make room for a personal trainer's children, struck her like a physical blow. Vivian's eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed into a dead faint, her emerald green gown pooling around her on the floor. Julian and Richard immediately dropped to the ground to attend to the unconscious matriarch, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. The few remaining guests who had lingered near the doors finally scrambled out into the night, desperate to escape the toxic, explosive fallout. Marcus stood completely alone in the center of the chaos. His hands fell to his sides. He looked at the medical papers scattered across the floor. He looked at his mother unconscious. He looked at the grand, opulent ballroom of the Magnolia Estate, the venue he had bankrupted himself to secure. The realization of his absolute total destruction hit him all at once. It was a physical, agonizing manifestation of pure regret. He had thrown away a brilliant, successful, fiercely loyal wife. He had stolen $12 million from his family's sacred trust fund, a crime that would surely send him to federal prison. He had embezzled another $4 million to pay for a wedding to a woman who was carrying another man's children. He had lost his career. He had lost his bank. He had lost his reputation in the Atlanta black elite. He was destitute, humiliated, and facing total ruin. And he had done it all for a lie. A guttural, primal roar ripped from the very bottom of his chest. It was the sound of a man watching his entire universe burn to ash. Marcus spun around and grabbed the edge of the massive, meticulously decorated banquet table. With a surge of insane adrenaline-fueled violence, he heaved the heavy wooden table upward. Crystal champagne flutes, gold-plated silverware, imported bone china, and towering $2 million floral arrangements went flying through the air. The table flipped entirely over, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a deafening, catastrophic explosion of shattering glass and splintering wood. He grabbed a Chiavari chair and hurled it against the wall, screaming at the top of his lungs. He tore at his own hair, pacing wildly like a caged beast. He kicked the scattered debris, weeping openly, the arrogant, untouchable investment banker reduced to a hysterical, broken mess. Chloe scrambled backward, crawling away from him on her hands and knees, terrified of his violent outburst. Serena stood frozen against the far wall, covering her mouth with trembling hands, watching her brother lose his mind. I stood perfectly still at the head of the ruined room. My black Saint Laurent trench coat remained flawlessly crisp. My heartbeat was steady and calm. I did not flinch when the table flipped. I did not react to the shattering glass. I watched the destruction with cold, clinical satisfaction. This was the exact, undeniable karma they had ordered. I was merely the delivery service. I watched Marcus drop to his knees among the broken crystal and crushed white orchids. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with heavy, agonizing sobs. He had nothing left. The kingdom he thought he ruled was entirely gone. He was surrounded by the wreckage of his own monumental arrogance and greed. The agonizing sound of Marcus weeping echoed through the cavernous, shattered banquet hall. He kneeled in a pool of spilled champagne and crushed petals. His custom tuxedo ruined his hands, gripping his hair, as if trying to hold his skull together. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, hollowed out by the instantaneous loss of his career, his wealth, and his fake heirs. He stared up at me, standing perfectly composed at the head of the room. The contrast between us was absolute. He was a broken, bankrupt fraud groveling in the dirt. I was the untouchable, self-made billionaire who owned the ground beneath him. Nia Marcus gasped, his voice a pathetic, ragged wheeze. He released his hair and dragged himself forward on his knees. He ignored the shards of broken crystal biting into his tailored trousers. He crawled toward me, a man completely stripped of his old money pride. "Nia, please. You have to help me." I did not step back. I stood like a marble statue, looking down at him with absolute clinical indifference. "I was so incredibly stupid," Marcus sobbed, reaching a shaking hand toward the hem of my coat, though he was too terrified to actually touch me. "I threw away the only real thing I ever had. You were the only one who ever truly had my back. You saved me from the Securities and Exchange Commission. You built me up. You covered my flaws. I was blinded by my parents and their obsession with bloodlines. I let them poison my mind against you because I was intimidated by your massive success." Serena, who was still pressing a wet napkin to Vivian's forehead, in the corner of the room, paused to watch her brother humiliating himself. Even Julian looked away in sheer disgust. We can fix this. Marcus babbled, his desperation making him completely delusional. You own Phoenix Holdings. You own the debt. You can stop the margin calls. We can reinstate the marriage. I will do whatever you want, Nia. I will sign whatever contracts you demand. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire city. Just please use your brilliance to save me from federal prison. Do not let my father destroy me. You are the only person smart enough to get me out of this nightmare. He was begging me to be his shield again. He wanted the working-class girl from the South Side to deploy her corporate genius to rescue him from the catastrophic consequences of his own spectacular treachery. He wanted to use me to clean up the financial ruin he caused while sleeping with a personal trainer's girlfriend. I looked down at his tear-streaked, pathetic face. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I did not need to. My absolute silence was a far more terrifying weapon. I slowly raised my hands to the collar of my heavy-tailored Saint Laurent trench coat. My movements were deliberate and meticulously paced. I grasped the top button and unfastened it. Marcus stopped babbling, his bloodshot eyes tracking my hands, profound confusion temporarily cutting through his blinding panic. I unfastened the second button, then the third. With a smooth, elegant motion, I swept my hands back, letting the heavy architectural fabric of the designer coat fall completely open. The coat parted to reveal the sleek, form-fitting black dress I wore underneath. The dress clung perfectly to my body, showcasing the beautiful, undeniable, perfectly round shape of my 6-month baby bump. Marcus stopped breathing. His jaw dropped so far it looked physically painful. His eyes bulged out of his skull, locking onto my stomach with a look of absolute incomprehensible shock. The sudden violent realization struck him with the force of a speeding train. Serena let out a sharp, breathless gasp from the corner of the room, her hand flying to cover her open mouth. Dr. Julian Stiles froze, his medical eyes instantly recognizing the timeline of a 6-month pregnancy. He looked at Marcus, then back at me, the clinical math calculating flawlessly in his head. You, Marcus choked out, pointing a trembling finger at my stomach. You are pregnant. I rested my hands gently on the top of my bump, feeling a fierce, protective surge of maternal power radiate through my veins. I looked down at the ruined, bankrupt man kneeling in the shattered glass, ensuring he understood the absolute totality of his defeat. Thanks for the $12 million child support advance, Marcus, I said, my voice echoing with terrifying, lethal perfection across the destroyed ballroom. Marcus let out a ragged, agonizing wheeze as if I had just driven a physical blade directly through his heart. The timeline shattered his mind. He realized instantly that I had been pregnant on the very day his mother handed me the divorce papers. He realized I had walked into that private dining room at the Piedmont Club, carrying his legitimate biological heir, and I had let him pay me $12 million to walk away. He realized that while he was frantically stealing from his father's trust fund to buy imported orchids for a woman who despised him, I was leveraging his own money to conquer his corporate board. He realized the child growing inside me was the only true Davenport heir, and I had legally, brilliantly stripped him of any right to claim my son. He had bankrupted his family trust, destroyed his banking career, and ruined his public reputation, all to fund a wedding for another man's children, while the woman he discarded was secretly securing his actual bloodline and building a global financial empire. My son will be inheriting my empire, I stated with absolute glacial authority, locking my eyes onto his terrified, weeping face. Not your family's debt. He will never know the toxic, arrogant weakness of the Davenport name. He will be raised by a self-made queen, and he will own the very ground your family walks on. Marcus let out a loud, guttural wail of pure agony. He slammed his fists against the hardwood floor, screaming as the absolute crushing weight of his catastrophic failure broke his mind completely. He had thrown away his wife, his fortune, and his only true heir. I did not stay to watch him weep. I simply turned on my heel, my designer heels crunching over the broken crystal of his ruined rehearsal dinner. I walked with my head held high, my posture impeccable, radiating the absolute power of a woman who had successfully conquered her enemies and secured her kingdom. I walked out the grand oak doors of the Magnolia estate, leaving the weeping, broken Davenport family to drown in their own spectacular destruction. The cool Atlanta night air washed over my face as I descended the marble steps. My private security detail opened the door of my waiting chauffeur-driven Maybach. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, wrapping my cashmere coat comfortably around my growing son. The heavy door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me off from the toxic world I had just annihilated. "Take us to the airport, Desmond," I instructed my driver, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water from the vehicle's console. "We have an empire to run in London." The Maybach pulled away from the estate, its tires gliding smoothly over the pristine gravel driveway. I looked out the tinted window one last time, leaving the burning wreckage of the Davenport dynasty firmly in my rearview mirror. I had won the war, and the future belonged entirely to us. The ultimate lesson here is that your true worth is never defined by those who are committed to misunderstanding your value. When faced with absolute betrayal, Nia didn't beg for a seat at a toxic family's table. She took their capital and bought the entire building. Real power doesn't come from arguing with people who disrespect you. It comes from walking away in absolute silence, securing your financial independence, and building an untouchable empire on your own terms. Sometimes the most devastating response to a painful rejection is simply leveling up. Never shrink yourself to fit into someone else's broken legacy. Drop a comment below and share a time you turned a painful betrayal into your absolute greatest comeback.